Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Sherry Beasley. On Saturday morning, June 29, 1991, 6-year-old Sherry Beasley woke up before the rest of her family. She put on a pink suit and a sweater and carefully left the bedroom she shared with her younger sister. The girl made breakfast for herself and her sister. Later, she asked her mother if she could go to the nearest store because she really wanted to buy some candy that was located nearby. Her young mother, Carrie Greenhill, had been feeling ill that day and sometimes allowed her daughter to leave the house to make small purchases. This time, Carrie even gave Sherry a list of groceries that needed to be purchased. At 1 p.m., Sherry got on her pink bike and set off on a journey that should have taken no more than half an hour. Another woman and her son went shopping at 1:20 p.m. as well. As they passed the store where Sherry was supposed to go, the woman noticed an abandoned pink bicycle. She recognized it right away because this was a small community where people lived in the area and everyone knew each other. Only Sherry had such a bicycle, which had been a Christmas present for the girl 6 months earlier. The neighbor had never seen Sherry's favorite gift thrown aside so carelessly. Looking around for the girl, she didn't see anyone, which seemed suspicious, but at first, she decided not to panic. Maybe the girl was somewhere nearby. As the woman was returning from the store, she noticed the bicycle without its owner again. This seemed more suspicious, especially since she was familiar with Sherry's mother. She stopped at Carrie's house and informed Carrie about the abandoned bicycle. Carrie became worried, so she immediately went to the indicated place, where she found the bicycle along with a bag containing cash and a grocery list. Some of the items were lying nearby, indicating that the girl had made it to the store and bought the necessary goods, but something had happened on her way back. Carrie glanced around the area but still couldn't find her daughter, so she went to the police. They took the case seriously and immediately began searching for Sherry. By the evening of the same day, news of her disappearance was dominating all the media. Many local residents came out to help and assisted in the search for her. All of this occurred in a quiet suburb of Melbourne called Rosebud, Australia, which at that time had a population of about 5,000 people. It is a place where many people know each other, and there is a very low crime rate. It is located on a peninsula, and rarely do you meet strangers. Many locals do not even lock their doors, and mothers let their children walk unsupervised. It was quiet here until Sherry went missing. Detectives talked to Sherry's mother and her partner. Carrie suspected Sherry's biological father, believing he might have kidnapped Sherry. They had long battled over custody of their daughter, and the man had taken the news of losing custody very badly. However, it was quickly confirmed that during that period, Sherry's father was fishing with friends in another region of the country, which was too far away for him to be involved in Sherry's disappearance. This theory was thus dismissed. Witnesses were found who saw Sherry meet with a little boy and talk to him. At that moment, a blue car drove by, but further developments happened without any witnesses. Shane admitted that he had met Sherry in the very location where the bicycle was found. He confirmed that suddenly, an unknown man drove up to the children, grabbed Sherry, and drove away. The man acted so quickly that Shane didn't even have time to react. Unfortunately, Shane didn't know much about car models and brands. He could only describe it as blue and lacking rear doors, likely a sedan. The police carefully examined the area where Sherry had disappeared and discovered tire tracks that confirmed Shane's story. The investigators continued their work and managed to find several witnesses who saw a similar-looking car with a driver described as a man between 30 and 40 years of age. Unfortunately, that description was also quite vague. Notably, a child was sitting in the passenger seat, and the girl appeared to be crying. Although they were unable to obtain a detailed description of the man, the police now knew the exact make of the kidnapper's car, a blue Toyota Corolla. It was a fairly popular model at that time, and in the area, there were about 700 similar cars registered, so the scale of the work only increased. A witness named Margaret Hobbs approached the site. She is a former law enforcement officer who has spent recent decades conducting rehabilitation therapy for assault-prone criminals in a private setting. Margaret, unsure of where her efforts to help society would lead her, worked as a probation officer for many years. After her dismissal, She became a psychotherapist and organized her own private practice, specializing in therapy with men who had committed abuse crimes. Margaret encountered criminals daily, usually those convicted of minor offenses. In November of 1984, 47-year-old Robert Arthur Selby Lowe was sent to see a specialist for the first time, charged with exposing himself to schoolgirls in a shopping mall and making inappropriate comments. He had a previous conviction for theft. From the start, Margaret noticed that the man was very different from the type of people she usually worked with. He was very polite, looked decent, neat, wore glasses, and had a British accent. For many years, he had worked as a church elder, was a Sunday school teacher, and a sports coach for children. No matter how decent he looked, Margaret figured him out. Despite his respectable appearance, something about him was alarming. After the trial, he received a year of correctional labor for exhibitionism, and then he began to regularly visit Margaret for therapy sessions. Gradually, she uncovered more and more criminal episodes from his past, starting from the time he lived in his homeland, Great Britain. Then, in search of a better life, he moved to New Zealand and later went to Australia. In 1967, he said that he regularly demonstrated himself and derived pleasure from it, especially if the victims were minors. Margaret noticed that he took pride in his dubious past. Margaret even managed to gain his trust. By April 1990, he came to her office and admitted to an accusation of attempted kidnapping of a minor. Robert again insisted that he had done nothing wrong. However, he mentioned that an alarming incident had indeed occurred in the suburbs where he worked at that time. Margaret was already good at getting the truth out of him, and gradually she managed to find out what had happened. He met with schoolgirls with whom he had a stagnant conversation about his dream pony. From their dialogue, it became clear that he could very well have had malicious intent. The next time Robert came, about a month later, he said that he had tried to talk to a 12-year-old girl, but a policeman intervened in their conversation. Now he had a new charge. Two girls, aged 8 and 10, were standing on the railway platform when Robert approached them and started an indecent conversation, attempting to persuade them toward intimacy. All this was overheard by a patrolman standing nearby, whom Robert did not notice. When the policeman approached, Robert tried to escape and had to be detained, thrown to the ground. Before he turned to Margaret, he asked her for help. Margaret refused to write him a characterization that could be used for defense in court because she was sure of his guilt. However, he threatened to involve the girls so that they would testify against him in court, which could become another trauma for them. It became obvious that Robert felt no remorse for what had happened. He was only trying to save himself, and his crimes were only becoming more dangerous. Margaret asked him not to come to therapy anymore. Previously, she believed she was helping him. However, she now realized that it was only getting worse. He was deriving perverted pleasure from their time together. Robert was angry about this and refused to quit therapy, but Margaret insisted he leave. As a result, he flared up and slammed the door. Later, Margaret agreed to write a characterization, but stated the truth within it. Robert's lawyer decided not to use this document in court, believing it would only harm his client. By November 1990, Robert was found guilty of stalking children, but the punishment turned out to be ridiculous. It was limited to a fine of $100. Knowing this, Margaret was alarmed. She now understood that he could get away with it. Fortunately for her, Robert did not visit Margaret for some time, as she had asked. Margaret was once again driving to her office when the first kidnapping in the Rosebud occurred. A search operation was underway, and by this time, authorities knew that the probable kidnapper was a man about 50 years old who could drive a blue Toyota Corolla. As soon as Margaret heard about it, she immediately thought of Robert Lowe. However, Margaret knew that his wife owned the house in the area where Sherry had gone missing. Of course, this was not enough ground to accuse him of anything, so Margaret dismissed the suspicion and continued her usual life. However, the thought that her former client could be involved in all this did not leave her mind. Margaret continued to monitor the search, which was not progressing, but locals were worried that Sherry had become a victim of an unknown serial killer, whom the media had dubbed Mr. Cruel. As it turned out, this man was credited with numerous crimes in the suburbs of Melbourne in the late 80s and early 90s. He was considered the main suspect in the kidnapping of 13-year-old Carmine Chain, who was abducted from her home about 3 months before Sherry Beasley's disappearance. Her body, with gunshot wounds, was found a year later in Edgar's Creek. Despite a long break, Robert Lowe came to Margaret again. Margaret's son-in-law had organized a law firm on the floor below her office, but he was not there, so Robert decided to talk to her. This time, the conversation was again about the crime of which he was accused. Naturally, according to him, the Supreme Court's decision was unfounded. Margaret immediately noticed that Robert had changed a lot. He looked unkempt and was rude to her. This atypical behavior only increased her suspicions about him. She refused to engage further and then went downstairs to see what kind of car Robert had arrived in. It turned out that he had used a blue Toyota Corolla without rear doors, just as described in the suspect's profile for the kidnapping. Margaret realized that he could indeed be involved in the disappearance of Sherry and contacted the police. It turned out that the police had recently reached his name on the list of cars and were checking him out. Robert matched the description of Sherry's kidnapper quite well in terms of age, appearance, and the make of the car. It was also discovered that Robert had a criminal past concerning harassment of minors, which looked especially suspicious. Then detectives had a conversation with him. Robert appeared too nervous, reluctantly answered questions, but quickly remembered what he did on the day of Sherry's kidnapping. His answers seemed dubious. Now, Margaret was sure of his involvement. The police arrived at Robert's house and took his car away for forensic examination. Robert himself was arrested and taken in for questioning. He was allowed to make one phone call and immediately reached out to Margaret, asking her to recommend the best lawyer she knew. Margaret advised him to stay with the lawyer who had already handled his previous cases. Then, Robert was released due to insufficient evidence. A month later, he came to work looking disheveled and sloppy as usual. According to him, detectives had interrogated him for more than 4 hours, but he refused to provide fingerprints and DNA samples. Without irrefutable evidence against him, the detectives could not proceed without his voluntary permission. However, suspicions against Robert were not unfounded. At the time of Sherry's disappearance, he provided an alibi that no one could confirm. During his communication with the detectives, Robert changed his story several times, which further strengthened the suspicion against him. When they tried to check the alibi, the time periods Robert indicated did not match the statements of witnesses, including his friend, employer, and wife. Even Robert's wife began to notice oddities in his behavior that day. Robert claimed he was not in that area, but several people saw him there. He returned home only in the evening, quickly changed his clothes, and threw his things in the washing machine, which he had never done before. He thoroughly washed his car. Curiously, he now lived in a country house not far from the place of Sherry's abduction. From the first meeting with Margaret, he insisted that he was innocent of Sherry's kidnapping and was sure that the police wouldn't find any evidence against him, allowing him to start a new life. 3 months after Sherry's disappearance, on September 24, 1991, 2 girls were riding horses along a country road about 10 kilometers from Rosebud. They smelled something unpleasant and went to investigate. Inside, the girls saw decomposed remains, but initially mistook them for a kangaroo. The next day, when they passed by again, they realized that scavenger animals had pulled the bones into the open. They then understood that what they saw was not an animal, but rather the remains of a small person who was wearing a pink tracksuit, matching the items of clothing that Sherry Beasley had been described as wearing. The girls went to the police and reported their frightening find. Forensic examination identified the remains as belonging to the missing 6-year-old girl, Sherry. During this period, Robert Lowe became a regular customer of Margaret. When she heard that the child's body had been found, she spoke to him about it. He clearly became nervous and inappropriately added that he had no idea where the body could have been found, even though Margaret did not ask him about it. She noticed that her client's behavior became increasingly erratic with each meeting, he more nervous each time. During this period, Margaret became convinced that Robert was responsible for the crime. It felt like a game of cat and mouse. Margaret knew that Robert would deny his guilt to the last. However, he liked to talk about what happened, and gradually, he revealed more and more details that he could not have known. Robert's house was searched. He was brought in for questioning several times, during which the suspect insisted that he was not guilty and had an alibi. Robert was under surveillance. It was found that he often visited public places where he watched girls and satisfied himself. Newspaper clippings and articles related to the kidnappings of Carmine Chain and other girls were found in his house. He did not just collect them but also made strange notes. All of this resembled some kind of madness, which was even confirmed by his wife. According to her, he talked about it so often while they were still living together that she was forced to ask him to stop. Now, she was determined to get a divorce. Finally, two detectives visited Margaret Hobbs and reported that they were investigating Robert's case, his probable involvement in the murder of Sherry Beasley. At that time, they still had no evidence. Additionally, Margaret did not want to violate medical ethics and disclose details of her therapy sessions with Robert. However, she began to doubt, realizing that he bore a striking resemblance to the real criminal. The detectives decided to act discreetly and secretly from Margaret. They installed a small microphone above the office, allowing them to listen to all of Robert Lowe's visits. Investigators were in the next building, eavesdropping on his revelations. One time Robert came in for therapy, he mentioned that he might know where the body was found, as one day he and his wife were walking there. Then, Margaret asked him to point to the location on a map. A stroke marked the location. Margaret checked and found that this mark precisely coincided with where the body of Sherry had been discovered. It seemed that this could not have been a mere coincidence. During the next visit, Robert entered the office and suddenly began to talk about how the child's body might have been eaten by insect larvae. This struck Margaret as inappropriate and alarming. She saw a small foreign object. Margaret quickly realized it was a larva. In anger, Margaret demanded he leave the office. Robert complied, leaving behind the plastic bag with which he had come. When Margaret looked inside, she found it was filled with larvae. By March 1992, Robert came to see Margaret again. At their meeting, he stated that he was inclined to block memories of the terrible deeds he had committed, to the extent that he truly could not remember anything. Margaret asked if this could be connected with the death of Sherry Beasley. He admitted that it indeed could be the case. However, he was more worried about the divorce, which he was struggling with. Robert continued to talk but did not say anything specific until April 1, 1992, when he finally told Margaret that he wanted to tell the truth. She agreed to help, after which he began his story. Robert said, on June 29, 1991, he was driving along the road when he noticed two children arguing on the street. It was Sherry and her friend, Shane. He stopped and offered Sherry a ride to avoid the conflict. She agreed, sat in the passenger seat, and buckled up. As he drove away, Sherry suddenly began to choke. She looked scared and panicked. By the time Robert stopped, the girl had stopped breathing. He checked her pulse and realized that she had died. His first thought was to dig a grave to dispose of the body. However, he didn't have a shovel. Robert wanted to take Margaret to where he left Sherry's body. Margaret was horrified but determined to obtain a complete confession, so she agreed but requested a couple of hours to prepare and settle some business. When Robert Lowe made his confession, the police were informed. Margaret was deeply concerned about the implications for professional ethics, but she understood that she was doing the right thing. A trip with the main suspect was scheduled for the same day, and the police offered to assist in catching a dangerous killer. They were going to accompany Margaret along with the criminal, but secretly, in order to get a confession without scaring him off. Margaret was given a special device with a panic button that she was supposed to press if she suddenly felt in danger. In addition, a hidden listening device was installed in the car. On the evening of the same day, Robert and Margaret headed to Rosebud. First, Robert decided to stop where a small pink bicycle had been found. He pointed out exactly where they had arrived, which was marked with a yellow ribbon tied to a tree that someone had left in memory of Sherry. Then they walked to the drain pipe where the body was found. Here, mourners had left flowers, organizing a semblance of a memorial. Robert told Margaret the story of Sherry Beasley, wiped his tears with his sleeve, prayed for his salvation, and offered Margaret to come in for a cup of tea, but she refused, left. Margaret felt unwell and stopped a couple of 100 meters away, where she threw up from the horror she experienced. After this, she expressed a desire to cooperate even more closely with the police to catch this dangerous man. Detectives collected all the necessary evidence, and by May 1993, Robert Lowe was arrested in the suburbs of Melbourne. He refused to cooperate and said that he was as pure as Jesus Christ. Therefore, detectives had to talk to his lawyer. Lowe's concept of guilt was useless because his confession had been recorded when he was brought to court. He was met by a crowd of journalists and angry members of the local community, including Sherry's mother. She wanted to pounce on him, but others held her back. It was believed that Robert was lying, claiming that Sherry had voluntarily gotten into the car. This contradicted the words of Shane's friend, who insisted that they had not quarreled and that the man had simply dragged Sherry into the car by force. Additionally, they did not believe that she had accidentally suffocated herself during a panic attack. Unfortunately, Sherry's body was found too late, making it difficult to establish the exact circumstances. Although he was in prison, new details of the crime emerged thanks to the testimony of a cellmate. However, these details needed to be checked and confirmed before the jury. His story about the killer was questioned, Robert, so the cellmate was offered to wear a wiretap to elicit more information. A legend was invented, according to which the cellmate had a good lawyer who could help Robert, but to do so, he needed to know exactly what happened. This story looked plausible, and the cellmate managed to convince him. Robert told a new, more convincing version of events, which is now considered final. He reported that he had watched Sherry for quite a long time and discovered that the little girl periodically went shopping alone. He kidnapped her, taking advantage of this, and brutally abused her. After that, he strangled her with his hands. Robert disposed of the body by throwing it down the drain and discarded the clothes because they had too many traces of his DNA on them. The trial of Robert Arthur Selby Lowe began in October 1994, with Margaret Hobbs becoming the prosecution's star witness and testifying for 4 days. His cellmate expressed gratitude to the detectives who allowed him to put a dangerous child killer behind bars. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and found Robert guilty of kidnapping and murdering Sherry Beasley. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for first-degree murder and an additional 15 years for kidnapping. Margaret's cooperation with the police was considered a controversial decision. People were divided into 2 camps. Some regarded her as virtuous for allowing a dangerous criminal to be put behind bars, while others accused her of failing to maintain the confidentiality of her client, which appeared unprofessional. In 1997, Robert appealed, arguing that Margaret should not have been a witness in the case, but this appeal was rejected. This story left an indelible mark on Margaret's soul, and she began writing a book. In 1996, she and her husband died in a car accident. The work on this book was completed by journalist and writer Andrew Rule. In 2021, Robert Arthur Selby Lowe, 84, died at Hopkins Correctional Center near Ararat in Western Victoria. The tragic fate of Sherry Beasley serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of innocence and the hidden dangers that can lurk even in the quietest of communities. What began as a simple errand on a peaceful Saturday morning spiraled into a nightmare that shattered the lives of her family and left an indelible scar on Rosebud. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Heidi Firkus. Heidi Firkus was born on December 14, 1984, as the youngest child and only daughter among the 3 children of John and Elinda Erickson. She lived a fulfilling life, known for her cheerful personality and artistic talents. After graduating from high school in 2003, Heidi attended Northwestern University in Roseville. She was a regular at Calvary Chapel, where she had been involved since childhood. At church, Heidi met Nick Firkus. They both became youth group leaders, serving the community with dedication and passion. Nick was born on February 25, 1983, to Julie and Steve Firkus. He is an ambitious and dynamic young man, working as the CEO of a reputable carpet cleaning company. Nick is known for his well-rounded personality and good work ethic. He found his ideal partner in Heidi, whom he met at Calvary Chapel. In 2005, Nick and Heidi, then 22 and 20, were married at the church where their love began. The wedding took place surrounded by family and friends. To outsiders, their marriage seemed perfect. They both loved traveling and cycling, were active in church activities. Heidi began working at her father's financial services company in an administrative role. Their relationship seemed to grow stronger over time. However, their lives were not what they seemed. Little did Heidi know that her life was about to take a turn. On the morning of April 25, 2010, a tragic event occurred in St. Paul, Minnesota. Heidi called 911 to report an intruder in her home. Just 38 seconds into the call, while Heidi was giving her address, she suddenly yelled, "No," and a gunshot rang out. 65 seconds after the first shot, Heidi's husband, Nick, used her phone to contact 911 again. He said in desperation, "Please, someone just broke into my house and shot me and my wife." During the call, Nick sobbed and repeatedly screamed, "Oh Heidi, my wife is dead, please come here." He also screamed, "No," in pain. When police arrived at the scene, they found Heidi lying unconscious in the kitchen with a gunshot wound to her back. Nick was lying next to her on the floor, still talking to 911. He looked very distressed and had a wound to his left leg. Nick told police that one or two intruders had broken into their home. He grabbed a handgun and tried to flee with his wife through the back door, heading towards the garage. However, the intruder grabbed the gun from Nick and shot both of them. Meanwhile, Nick was taken to the emergency room for treatment. There, police questioned him about why he and Heidi left their bedroom, which was supposedly safer, to face potential danger. Nick explained that they were just trying to escape the house through the back door. After being treated for his injuries, Nick was released from the hospital after only 3 hours. Nick was called back to the police station for further questioning about the incident. He recounted in detail what happened. Nick said he remembered that he and Heidi watched a movie and drank alcohol together that night. They went to bed around midnight. Nick said he woke up the next morning, between 6:10 and 6:15, to the sound of the screen door opening and someone trying to unlock the front door. Investigators asked Nick about the door being locked. Nick admitted that he and Heidi usually locked it, but he thought he had forgotten to do so on the night of the incident. Upon hearing the strange noise, Nick said he retrieved the handgun from the upstairs closet. He explained that he had brought it up from the basement a month earlier because it had begun to rust. Initially, the gun was unloaded, but he loaded it when he heard the noise. He then woke Heidi and asked her to call 911. He instructed her to leave the house and go to the garage, where they had parked their car, as part of a safety plan they had agreed upon in case of danger. Although right-handed, Nick held the handgun in his left. He followed behind Heidi, protecting her as they moved towards the garage. Nick said that he and Heidi stopped at the front door to get her purse. Suddenly, the door opened, and a man rushed in. The intruder was dark-skinned, about 6 feet 1 inch tall, weighing between 200 and 220 pounds, and wearing a dark-colored hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled tightly around his face. Nick said the intruder grabbed his handgun. They struggled, and during the scuffle, the gun went off. Nick explained, "My finger accidentally touched the trigger. Heidi was running away, so I may have hit her in the back." Nick recounted the incident that the first shot hit Heidi, causing her to fall immediately. He and the intruder continued to wrestle for the gun. During the struggle, the gun went off again, hitting Nick in the upper thigh. He fell to the ground from his wound. At that point, the intruder escaped through the front door. Nick told investigators that Heidi became unconscious after being shot, and he later lost consciousness due to his wound. Nick told the police that their home was going to be foreclosed on the following day. They planned to inform family and friends of the situation that same day. Nick explained that, due to falling behind on their mortgage payments, their home had been repossessed and sold. Although they had to leave, they hadn't told anyone about it. Their plan was to pack up on Sunday and leave some items in the garage for pickup later on Monday morning. They planned to find temporary accommodation, but life took a different turn. Brendan O'Connor, a neighbor who was cat-sitting at a nearby home, reported to police that he heard an argument followed by gunshots. He also heard someone shouting for help. "You shot her. You shot me. Please, please don't." Although no one saw the intruder flee, Nick provided police with a sketch of the suspect a few weeks later, which was released to the public. Police described the suspect as an unidentified man, 6 feet 1 inch tall, weighing 200 to 220 pounds, and wearing a dark-colored hoodie. About 3 weeks after the murder, the police showed Nick an artist's sketch of the suspect based on his original description. In this updated report, Nick further described the suspect as African American, estimated to be between the ages of 40 and 60. Based on this information, the initial investigation focused on finding the unidentified African American intruder. Police searched the surrounding area extensively, hoping to find evidence or witnesses to corroborate Nick's account. However, the investigation into Heidi's death did not result in any arrests or charges. As a result, the case remained unsolved for many years. More than a decade later, Heidi's murder remains unsolved. Nick appears to have moved on with his life, marrying Rachel and starting a family. However, when financial troubles resurface, Rachel begins to suspect that her husband has hidden secrets. Nick's reluctance to discuss his finances makes Rachel even more curious. She begins to dig deeper and discovers irregularities in Nick's past. These discoveries make Rachel question everything she knows about her husband, including his possible involvement in Heidi's death. Rachel is unaware of the couple's financial troubles, similar to Heidi in Nick's situation years ago. Concerned, Rachel contacts the authorities, bringing attention to the case. Investigators then focus on Rachel Furcus, Nick's second wife since 2012. While speaking to the authorities, Rachel reveals that she divorced Nick in 2019 due to his worsening financial problems. She also recorded an argument with Nick about his affair before their divorce. "He definitely did the same thing he did with Heidi," Rachel told investigators. "I saw a letter warning us that we hadn't paid our property taxes and were at risk of being evicted in 2020 if we didn't pay." When Rachel reported her suspicions to the police, the Heidi murder case was reopened. Sergeant Nicole Sipes of the St. Paul Police Department was assigned to the case. She listened carefully to Rachel's concerns and began reviewing all the evidence. Determined to find the truth, Sergeant Nicole took a bold step. She asked the FBI to help analyze the 911 call recordings. She hoped this would lead to new clues that would shed light on what happened the night of Heidi's murder. After a thorough examination of the recordings, the FBI found no evidence of a third party being involved. This was surprising because it contradicted Heidi's husband's previous statement to the police. Sergeant Nicole and her team were puzzled by this new information. If Heidi and her husband were the only ones in the house, then what exactly happened between them that led to her death? The absence of a third person further raised suspicions about the husband's involvement in the murder. The investigation continued to intensify in order to find the truth. New discoveries by the FBI opened up new lines of inquiry. Sergeant Nicole was more determined than ever to bring justice to Heidi and provide answers to her grieving family. Investigators collected financial documents that contradicted Nick's previous statements, making him the prime suspect in Heidi's murder. Nick's account of the incident kept changing. Initially, he said that the intruder had taken his gun and shot both him and Heidi. He later testified that the intruder did not take the gun, but that he had accidentally pulled the trigger, hitting Heidi in the back. After a thorough investigation, investigators found no signs of a break-in, such as overturned furniture or marks on the walls. The forensic analysis of the scene did not match Nick's account of the incident, especially regarding the direction in which the bullet struck Heidi. Additionally, Heidi did not mention seeing the intruder in the 911 call. The lack of evidence of a break-in made investigators suspicious. They believed it was part of Nick's plan to cover up his role in Heidi's death. As a result, an arrest warrant was issued for Nick on May 19, 2021, more than 10 years after Heidi's death. SWAT arrested Nick at his home in Mounds View. The arrest was the result of Rachel's suspicions and the investigative efforts of Sergeant Nicole Sipes. Many were surprised because the case was thought to be dead. As the trial progresses, the details of the case will be revealed, and the truth about that fateful night will gradually come to light. The big question on everyone's mind is whether Nick was responsible for Heidi's death. After Nick was arrested, Heidi's family said, "We are incredibly grateful to everyone who has worked tirelessly to bring this case to this stage. We also thank everyone who has prayed for and supported us over the years. We hope that these charges will help to clarify the truth and bring justice to Heidi. While we cannot bring Heidi back, we believe she would have wanted us to find the truth. God is glorified by the truth. Heidi's life and memory are further honored by the truth being revealed." The family expressed relief, gratitude, and determination to find the truth. They thanked those who persisted and the community's support, hoping Nick's charges will bring justice. When the case went to trial, Nick maintained his innocence. His family, especially his father, also believed in Nick's innocence. They believed that Nick's deep love for Heidi could not have led him to commit murder. However, the jury had a different view. After 10 hours of deliberating the evidence, on February 10, 2023, they reached a surprising verdict. Nick was convicted of brutal murder. This decision left everyone who knew Heidi stunned and in disbelief, especially since Nick was the person Heidi trusted the most. During the trial, the prosecution detailed the defendant Nick's difficult financial situation. They argued that Nick had kept his financial problems from Heidi and, fearing embarrassment, decided to kill her. The prosecution also questioned Nick's story about the home invasion, arguing that it could have been a cover-up for the crime. Compelling evidence was presented that there were no signs of forced entry into the home, there were many inconsistencies in Nick's testimony, and no DNA or physical evidence of an intruder was found. These factors reinforced the prosecution's argument that Nick was the perpetrator, not an intruder as he claimed. The lack of evidence cast serious doubt on the veracity of Nick's story. At the trial, the prosecutor accused Nick of not wanting to face the truth about his deceitful behavior, leading him to take the extreme step of killing Heidi to protect his reputation. Defense attorney, in contrast, argued that the transition from financial hardship to murder was unreasonable. He also argued that the idea of killing his wife to save his reputation was absurd and had no psychological basis. After a thorough trial and careful consideration of the evidence, the jury unanimously found Nick Ferris guilty of first-degree murder. On April 13, 2023, the judge handed down the harshest sentence possible. Nick would serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite his guilty verdict, Nick Ferris maintained that he had nothing to do with the death of his wife, Heidi. He maintained his innocence, even after his conviction. Currently, Nick is serving a life sentence at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in St. Cloud, Minnesota. However, the motive for the murder remains unclear, leaving us to wonder what drove Nick to commit this regrettable act. However, the investigation revealed that in June 2009, Nick received a foreclosure notice on his home. The house was then auctioned off at a sheriff's auction that same month. About 10 months before Heidi's murder, the eviction process began in February 2010, and a hearing was scheduled for March 8, 2010, which Nick attended alone. The original closing date was April 9, 2010. Nick contacted attorneys, claiming that his grandmother was in the hospital and dying, and asked for the closing date to be moved to April 26th. When investigators looked into the matter, they found no evidence that Nick's grandmother was actually in the hospital or had died in 2010. When they asked if Heidi knew about all of this, Nick claimed that Heidi was fully aware of their financial difficulties. He added that they had planned together to leave the foreclosed house and start a new life elsewhere. But the truth is that Nick killed his wife to hide his financial troubles from her. He was too ashamed to admit that he owed $118,000 in credit card debt and was 22 months behind on his mortgage. Although justice has been served, the pain and loss of Heidi's loved ones will remain. No punishment can undo the harm done or bring back the beautiful life she lost so cruelly. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Karina Vetrano. On Tuesday, August 2, 2016, Karina Vetrano met her father, Philip, after work. They had planned to spend time together as family gatherings had become increasingly rare due to everyone's busy schedules. Karina was juggling 2 jobs at the time. Philip picked her up and took her to his home, where they shared stories about their week. As Karina prepared to head home, she invited her father to join her for a jog, an activity they often did together. However, Philip declined, explaining that his back was hurting badly and he thought he might need a new prescription or that the change in weather was affecting him. He offered to call a cab for her instead. Karina turned down the offer because she was focused on training for an upcoming marathon and thought jogging would be helpful. Unbeknownst to her parents, this would be the last time they saw their daughter. At 5:45 p.m., she left her father's house to go for a jog. Starting at Spring Creek Park, a peaceful oasis surrounded by greenery in the heart of the city. Large parts of the park are inaccessible due to dense bush and swamps, so Karina's father, Philip, advised her to run her usual route to avoid strangers and unexplored paths. However, Karina's desire for solitude led her to disregard her father's advice. She wandered into a deserted, grassy area. Karina's tranquil moment was short-lived. A severe pain struck the back of her head, and she collapsed. This careless decision proved fatal for she. 2 hours had passed since they bid farewell to their youngest daughter, and she was nowhere to be found. The Philip household became enveloped in anxiety and uncertainty. She should have returned home by now or at least responded to her parents' calls, as she had promised to carry her cell phone with her. Karina's father sensed something was wrong and decided to seek help from his neighbor, who happened to be the chief of the New York City Police Department. Since they had a good relationship, the chief knew Philip wouldn't contact him without a valid concern. After that, Karina was reported missing, and police launched a search for her, focusing on the park area and surrounding streets. Experienced K-9 units were brought in to aid in the search. It's well known that the first 24 hours after someone vanishes are the most critical and revealing. To maximize the chances of finding the missing person, law enforcement utilized every resource available. Meanwhile, Philip, along with a group of volunteers, conducted his own search for his daughter. He thoroughly scoured the park, making phone calls as he searched. As dusk fell, Philip spotted something in the grass and walked towards it. As he approached, he recognized Karina's phone and hoped she might have just misplaced it. However, as he cautiously made his way through the thicket towards the police officers, he stumbled upon something in the grass. He then stumbled upon the partially undressed body of a female corpse lying face down. Philip turned the body over and was met with a devastating sight. It was the face of his daughter, Karina. A heart-wrenching scream burst from Philip's chest as he realized the unthinkable. It turned out his daughter Karina hadn't lost her phone as he initially thought. The truth was far more devastating. Karina had lost her life. The police rushed to his side as he let out a desperate cry. They gently pulled him away from Karina's body, explaining that the area was now a crime scene and everything needed to be protected as evidence. The silence of the car ride home was oppressive, punctuated only by Mr. Phillips' tormented thoughts. He was consumed by the daunting task of breaking the news to his wife about their daughter's tragic passing. Memories of Karina's life flooded his mind. He remembered the day she was born, July 12, 1986, in Queens. From a young age, Philip had been incredibly proud of his second daughter, Karina. She was a model child, obedient, well-mannered, and diligent in her studies. One of his fondest memories was taking the little girl to school for her first day. Karina's academic prowess had led her to earn a master's degree in speech pathology from St. John's University, a testament to her hard work and determination. Karina always wanted to help children, particularly those with autism. Additionally, she was a talented individual with a variety of interests, including traveling and writing. She was also an avid sports enthusiast, with a special fondness for running. Her and her father's similar passion for running brought them closer together. Philip remembered how he had protected her from those who were courting her, not wanting anyone to hurt her. He hoped that one day she would find true love and build a strong family like his own, giving him and his wife wonderful grandkids. As Mr. Philip approached his home, he felt the weight of his emotions. Taking a deep breath, he mustered the strength to put on a brave face. He knew his family needed him to be strong. His wife met him at the door and saw the pain in his face. She didn't need him to say a word, she immediately understood what was wrong. She rushed to his side, embracing him as she burst into tears. Karina's loved ones were understandably shocked and distraught when they learned about her sudden death. It was difficult for them to accept the brutal nature of the attack. The investigation revealed that Karina had put up a fierce struggle. Her clenched fists were proof that she had resisted her attacker until the very end. Injuries such as bruises and abrasions were found on her body, and her athletic clothes were torn. The autopsy revealed that Karina's death was ultimately caused by asphyxiation. However, her skull had also suffered blunt force trauma, likely from being hit with a stone. A visible mark on her neck further confirmed the violent nature of the attack. The forensic examination supported the police's initial suspicions, indicating that the crime was both deeply personal and extremely brutal. Further evidence of the struggle was found under Karina's fingernails. Dirt and grass were found embedded under her nails, indicating she attempted to pull away from her attacker. Specialists also examined her mouth, discovering that several of her teeth were cracked and knocked out, indicating that she had bitten down in self-defense. Karina's neck showed multiple scratches, evidence of the intense struggle she went through. Her attacker's grip had been unrelenting, prompting Karina to grab at her attacker with all her might in an attempt to force them to let go. Karina's strong will to survive was evident in her fierce resistance, and she fought valiantly for her life. Following her tragic death, another disturbing discovery found in Howard Beach, Massachusetts, where Karina lived. A second jogger's body was found in a secluded area with dense foliage, causing concern that a serial offender may be at large. To investigate these similarities, geneticists compared DNA samples collected from both crime scenes. DNA samples were discovered on both victims. However, the DNA analysis yielded an unexpected result. The samples did not match, indicating they belonged to different suspects. Notably, one DNA sample was found under Karina's fingernails, on her back, and on her phone. Despite the small amount, investigators were able to successfully analyze the evidence. The DNA found at the crime scene was the only lead in the investigation, providing a way to identify the killer. Given that most murders are committed by someone known to the victim, the police couldn't rule out any possibilities. To explore this, Karina's father submitted his DNA for testing, as he was the first person to discover her body. Unfortunately, the testing was done on the same day as Karina's funeral. Karina's other relatives also underwent DNA testing, but no matches were found. Investigators then conducted interviews with Karina's relatives and friends to determine if she had any enemies. However, everyone they spoke to seemed to respect and love her. As a result, the investigators came up with a new theory. The crime was likely committed by someone who targeted Karina because of her physical appearance and was driven by impulsive desires. Feeling stuck, authorities turned to the public for assistance, offering a $10,000 reward for any information that could lead to the killer's capture. The public responded in large numbers, with over 250 leads, 600 genetic tests, and more than 1,700 reports being compiled. However, despite the extensive effort, the investigation remained unresolved. One major challenge was the possibility that the perpetrator had no prior record of crime, making it even more difficult to identify and catch them. On August 31, 2016, a utility worker reported seeing a suspicious person near the scene of Karina's death. He told police that he saw a man emerge from the bushes in a restricted area of the park and run north. The New York Police Department created a sketch of the suspect based on his description. However, by December 2016, they acknowledged that this individual may have been an innocent bystander. The release of the sketch did not yield any new leads, and the investigation came to a standstill. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case on December 4, 2016. According to the FBI, the perpetrator was likely familiar with the area, especially the park where the crime occurred. This suggested that the attacker may have lived nearby, which is why they thought it was an ideal location to commit the crime without being detected. As a result, the police were cautious not to show their emergence in the area, knowing the perpetrator might be avoiding them to avoid capture. To follow up on the investigation, the police also conducted screenings of local African American men who fit the suspect's description. However, this effort did not lead to any breakthroughs in the case. Detective John Russo, who was part of the investigation, recalled an important detail. He had noticed a young man in a hoodie frequently walking around the park. John even tried to follow him out of curiosity about his strange behavior. The young man moved slowly and paused for extended periods in front of houses near the park, as if he were looking for targets to rob. However, then John lost track of him. 2 months later, a store owner reported seeing a person who looked similar. This made John rethink his earlier observations. He re-examined the file of a teenager matching the description, whose name was Chanel Lewis. Detectives became interested in Chanel because of his strange behavior. They started asking questions to his friends and teachers to gather more information. It was discovered that Chanel had shown interest in harming the girls, which made investigators more suspicious of him. No other leads, officers decided to focus on Chanel. Chanel's life was unremarkable, mirroring that of many young African Americans in Brooklyn's low-income housing. He resided in a housing complex several miles from Spring Creek Park, where he lived with his mother, 3 sisters, and their children. Chanel was unemployed, but despite being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he managed to graduate from a private school catering to students with emotional and behavioral challenges. Chanel's former classmates described him as a quiet and isolated individual who was frequently bullied and belittled by his peers. He had no close friends and was often ridiculed for his appearance and clothing choices. However, after being teased, Chanel would typically smirk and walk away rather, earning him the derogatory nickname African Lizard. Not everyone saw Chanel in a negative light, though. A classmate named Danielle remembered him as intelligent, with good grades, who would occasionally share amusing videos with her on the bus. Danielle never witnessed Chanel displaying cruel behavior. According to some sources, Chanel once claimed that he wanted to slit the throats of all the girls in high school. He then asked, "What if he bring a knife to school?" However, Dr. Edward Dana, the executive director of Lewis's school, asserted that Chanel never harmed anyone during that time, nor was he disciplined. Despite this, Chanel struggled with bullying during his teenage years, which left him traumatized. Nevertheless, he aspired to work in social services, driven by a desire to help people in distress. Whenever conflicts arose at home, he would often take long walks, frequently visiting a local park. Chanel had a few minor run-ins with the police. 2 incidents occurred in the Spring Creek area for ordinance violations, and another took place in May 2016 for urinating in public. In another incident, a store owner reported he for loitering with a crowbar, but responding officers released him after checking his ID and finding no prior incidents. The police kept this information on record. It was later discovered that during the time of Karina's death, Chanel was not at home. After an argument with his family, he had gone to the park. Upon his return, his appearance was disheveled, with torn clothing and visible bruises and abrasions. Chanel's mother inquired about what had happened, and he claimed he had been attacked. His account matched the timeline with a witness's description of a man fleeing the park. Additionally, on August 3, 2016, Chanel's father, a former school principal, took him to the hospital for treatment of severe wounds, most of which were cuts, and he also had an injured hand. The investigators reviewed the medical records from that day and found the story plausible. On February 4, 2017, Chanel was brought to the police station and voluntarily provided his DNA for analysis. Would a perpetrator willingly do this? Detectives wondered. The interrogation began on the morning of February 5. He admitted that he was indeed in the park around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016, but clarified he was walking on dirt paths, not through the thickets, and listening to music. He confessed to encountering a young woman jogging with her phone in her hand. When asked by detectives if something happened when he encountered her, Chanel nodded and quietly said yes. Chanel's vague answers to investigators left everyone confused. He eventually said he was angry and that what happened happened. Investigators were skeptical of this confession, as it could raise questions for the jury at trial. They hoped Chanel would provide more details. Chanel explained that he had gone for a walk in the park to clear his mind after a family argument. Then he saw Karina walking alone and decided to follow her. He said that as she passed him, he grabbed her by the shoulders, wrestled her to the ground, and hit her in the face about 5 times to stop her from screaming. He said his punches knocked out some of her teeth and he injured her hand. Chanel noted that the struggle lasted about 5 minutes, during which she fought back violently, scratching and biting his. Chanel dragged her off the path into tall grass, where he tried to undress and assault her. Despite her shock, she continued to resist until Chanel strangled her. Then he realizing only afterward that she was no longer alive. When asked if he had known the victim before, he replied, he did not know her before this. It all happened by chance. The motive for his actions was even more surprising. He revealed that loud music from a neighborhood gang member had triggered his anger and uncontrollable aggression. Negative emotions were directed at the unfortunate woman, which seemed like a strange reason for the act. Investigators were no longer confused after obtaining DNA results that matched exactly. Microscopic traces found on Karina's body and phone belonged to Chanel. With this evidence, the police and prosecutor concluded that the case was ready for court. However, the motive still seemed unclear. It's possible that Chanel had seen Karina before, since he often visited the park and may have noticed her with her father. He might have developed an interest in her and tried to approach her, but after being rejected, he became angry and attacked her, resulted in a tragic incident. This explanation would make more sense. The trial against Chanel Lewis began on November 5, 2018. Despite his previous statements to the authorities, he pleaded not guilty, a claim supported by his family, who denied his involvement in the crime. The prosecution charged Chanel with murder and sexual assault, with potential penalties ranging from 25 years or life in prison. The debate about Chanel's guilt played out not only in the courtroom but also in the media. Chanel's defense team questioned whether the police followed proper procedures during his arrest, along with various news outlets alleging racial bias and discrimination. However, the judge dismissed these claims as unfounded, stating that the investigation followed legal procedures. The prosecution provided solid evidence and DNA analysis results. In contrast, the defense argued that the evidence was inadequate and compromised due to the high number of people present at the crime scene, including the victim's father, who found her body. Forensic biologist Linda Rosano noted that the likelihood of the DNA matching someone other than Chanel was 1 in 6 trillion. The prosecutor also presented his phone records, which showed internet searches related to second chances and forgiveness in Catholicism, raising the question of what sin Chanel was trying to make amends for. Additionally, the release of Chanel's confession video led to more controversy because his lawyer asserted that he confessed under great pressure from the police. They alleged that police may have fabricated evidence by starting the recording only after Chanel was coerced and that the search of his home did not follow proper procedures. The defense argued that the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death was mishandled at the start. As public pressure for the suspect's arrest grew, Chanel Lewis became the scapegoat. The jury took the defense's arguments seriously but still had difficulty reaching a verdict. This led the judge to declare a mistrial on November 21, 2018. A retrial was initially set for January 22, 2019, but was later rescheduled for March. After 5 hours of reconsideration, Chanel Lewis was found guilty of Karina Vetrano's murder and sentenced to life without parole on July 23, 2019. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Rob Andrew. Brenda Evers was born on December 16, 1963, in Enid, Oklahoma. Her parents were Christians. The family often gathered around the dinner table, prayed together, and participated in church activities. Brenda grew up to be a quiet and calm girl. She did well in school and spent a lot of time at church helping others. While many of her friends were dating, Brenda patiently waited for her ideal partner. While in high school, she cheered for the school's soccer team. Brenda was a moral and humble young woman, just like her mother. She loved to dance but did not go to parties often. Brenda's goal was to be a devoted wife and mother, devoting herself to her family after marriage. At the age of 17, Brenda met Rob Andrew, her friend's older brother. Rob was older and in college. They quickly discovered that they had much in common. Although they were from different branches of Christianity, Brenda was Lutheran and Rob was Baptist. They both held conservative views, attended church regularly, and wanted to raise a large, happy family. Their friendship gradually blossomed into romance. Brenda then went to college in Winfield, Kansas. Despite being 125 miles apart, they tried to keep in touch regularly. To be closer to her lover, Brenda transferred to a college in Stillwater, Oklahoma, a year later. By the end of the summer of 1984, they married. Not long after, Rob received an attractive job offer in Houston, Texas. Although he was hesitant, Brenda convinced her husband to accept it. While Rob developed his career as an advertising executive, Brenda also completed her degree and found a job in the banking industry. Brenda loved the bustling life in the big city, with its tall buildings and vibrant nightclubs. Texas changed her a lot. She became more confident, started taking care of herself, dressed fashionably, wore makeup, and made many friends. However, Rob was not happy with these changes. He believed that a woman of faith should be more restrained. In addition, Rob began to feel homesick. So when he received an offer to return to the advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he happily agreed. Brenda did not support her husband's decision, leading to an argument between the two. In the end, they agreed that Rob would move to the new place first, and if everything went well, his wife would follow. After several months of living apart, the family reunited. In the early 1990s, Rob and his wife moved into a luxury home in Landsbrook. 9 months later, they had their first daughter, Tricity. Brenda quit her job to become a stay-at-home mom and raise the children. 4 years later, they had their son, Parker. Their family life seemed perfect, with love, children, home, and wealth. Rob and Brenda were married for approximately 17 years and had 2 children together. As a deeply religious couple, they raised their children with strong faith and moral values. They regularly attended church as a family and participated in charitable activities. From the outside, their marriage appeared happy and stable. However, in October 2001, their family life unexpectedly fell apart when Brenda left Rob and initiated divorce proceedings. After that, Rob stopped by their old home to pick up their children for the holidays as planned. That evening, Brenda met him at the door and asked him to fix a broken appliance in the garage. As Rob bent down to check, he heard footsteps behind him. As he turned around, he was shot and fell to the concrete floor. At around 6 p.m., emergency services received a call from Brenda. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance was dispatched immediately. When paramedics arrived, they found a horrific scene in the garage. A man was lying in a pool of blood, dead from a gunshot wound. His wife, Brenda, had a less serious wound to her arm. Brenda's clothes were covered in blood, and she appeared to be in shock. Paramedics confirmed that she was indeed in shock. Brenda said that she had tried to give Rob first aid, but she thought he was dead. They noticed that the victim's hand was bandaged. After the incident, Brenda was taken to the hospital for treatment. Police began investigating the scene as soon as the ambulance left. They found a .22 caliber bullet in the wall and a shotgun shell casing, indicating that multiple weapons were used. Police also found the victim's wallet intact, ruling out the possibility of a robbery. To clarify the incident, they needed to interview Rob's ex-wife. At the hospital, Brenda explained the reason for her encounter with Rob. She said that while they were together, 2 masked and armed men broke into the garage. The attackers shouted something that Brenda could not hear. One shot Rob twice, and the other shot and wounded Brenda as she tried to run away. Both attackers then fled. Brenda did not know the identity or motive of the attackers. She believed that Rob was unlikely to have enemies because he was kind and helpful. Brenda admitted that she was scared, especially since there were children in the house at the time of the attack. However, Brenda's story was inconsistent. The police suspected that she was not telling the truth, especially when they saw that the children had not packed for the trip. Interviewing neighbors also did not yield any useful information. No one noticed anything unusual that night. To learn more about Brenda and Rob's personal lives, detectives decided to interview people they knew. It turns out that after the birth of their second child, the relationship between Andrew and Brenda became strained. Andrew often complained to friends and pastors that Brenda mistreated him and hated their marriage. In addition, a close family friend commented that the couple's feelings seemed abnormal. Brenda often expressed her feelings openly, even in front of strangers. Rob seemed to love Brenda too much, as he had forgiven her inappropriate behavior for a long time. Family friends all noticed that Brenda had changed significantly. From a normal housewife, she had become a woman with a more liberal lifestyle. These accusations were well-founded and were backed by clear evidence. Brenda seemed to be going through a midlife crisis. Her style of dress changed significantly. From a refined woman, she changed to wearing revealing clothes and wearing too much makeup. Not only that, Brenda also became secretive with her husband. She did not share where she went, who she met, or what she did. Eventually, Rob discovered that his wife was having an affair. In October 1997, Brenda began an extramarital relationship with Rick Nunley, the husband of a friend and former co-worker at a bank in Oklahoma. They dated for a year, then only communicated by phone occasionally. Brenda then began a relationship with James Higgins, a local store owner. At first, James Higgins was attracted to Brenda's style of dress and flirtatiousness. They began seeing each other regularly once or twice a week after Brenda gave him a hotel room key. The relationship lasted about 5 years. During this time, Brenda's husband, Rob, was completely unaware of the affair. However, he realized that their marriage was in trouble. Brenda hardly spoke to or spent time with Rob anymore. Despite this, Rob remained hopeful that things would improve and tried his best to keep his family together. In 2001, Brenda ended her relationship with James Higgins. This decision had nothing to do with her husband or their marriage. Instead, Brenda had gradually fallen into a life of debauchery and vice. 2 years earlier, a Baptist church had been built in Oklahoma City, largely thanks to Rob's contributions. There, Rob became a deacon, and his wife took on the role of Sunday school teacher. Outwardly, their family appeared prosperous and adhered to traditional moral standards. At that time, Brenda still maintained the image of a model wife. She enthusiastically taught the children basic lessons about religion and friendship. At the church, Brenda met James Pavitt, a married part-time teacher and friend of Rob's. Although James was a devout Christian, he was attracted to Brenda's charm. They began seeing each other in the spring of 2001. At first, they kept their relationship secret, but it gradually became more public. Everyone in the church noticed their closeness. Rob suspected his wife of having an affair, and the two had a big argument. When James divorced his wife, Brenda and Rob also decided to divorce. Although Rob still wanted to save the marriage, Brenda was determined to file for divorce. Shortly after this event, a mysterious call was made to Rob's office, and then a serious car accident occurred, believed to be an assassination attempt on him. Rob became suspicious of Brenda and James, so he reported it to the police. Rob did not oppose the divorce and agreed to the custody arrangement for the children. He even supported Brenda financially. So, what was the motive for killing him? The motive was money. James Pavitt, who was also an insurance agent in addition to teaching, had sold Rob an $800,000 insurance policy that summer, with Brenda as the sole beneficiary. As police investigated the attack on Rob's family, they discovered two important things: the relationship between Brenda and James, as well as a problem with the family's car brakes. As the events connected, Brenda's role in her husband's murder became clearer. Finally, the police also found a new suspect. It was Brenda's new lover, James Pavitt. 2 weeks before the garage incident, Rob went to the insurance company to remove his wife, Brenda, from the policy because she was unfaithful. James, the insurance agent, refused, stating that only the beneficiary, Brenda, could make changes to the policy. Not trusting James, Rob checked with the management. The investigation revealed that Brenda and James had attempted to falsify the policy by transferring ownership to Brenda. They had forged Rob's signature and backdated the changes. James's supervisor confirmed to Rob that he was still the owner of the policy and that only the insured could make changes to it. When James learned of this discovery, he was furious, as it led to his dismissal. Investigators learned that Rob had a 16-gauge shotgun when he left the house. During the search of Brenda's house, Brenda did not turn the gun over, and it was not found, which was quite strange. However, when they searched neighbor's house, Judy Gigstad's house, they made an unexpected discovery: A shell casing from the sought-after handgun was found on the bedroom floor, along with several .22 caliber bullets in the Gigstad's attic. The Gigstads were not home at the time of the crime, and there were no signs of forced entry. Gigstad's family confirmed that Brenda had their spare key. In addition, a key piece of evidence came from Joanna Larson, James Pavitt's daughter. On the day of the crime, she lent her father her car with the promise that he would have it repaired. However, when Joanna retrieved the car, she discovered that it had not been repaired and found a .22 caliber bullet inside. When she informed her father, he told her to throw the bullet away. Investigators also discovered that James had purchased a handgun the week before the crime. Therefore, they planned to question James and Brenda. On November 23, Rob's funeral was held. The case was confusing to the victim's family and friends. What was suspicious was that Brenda, her children, and James Pavitt were all absent from the ceremony. This absence worried Rob's relatives and the police. Apparently, those who did not show up had fled, perhaps assuming that the police were searching for the perpetrators. By that time, the suspects had been identified. The autopsy results were released. Brenda's account of the attack differed significantly from the forensic report. As the police had suspected, 2 different weapons were used in the attack. Rob and Brenda's injuries did not match Brenda's description. The first shot at Rob was fired from a distance with a shotgun, while the second shot was fired at close range with a .22 caliber pistol. Brenda's arm was also shot at close range with the same .22. By analyzing the location and shape of the bloodstains on his clothes, it was concluded that Brenda was near Rob when he was shot. The angle of the bloodstains matched the shooter's position, indicating that Brenda herself fired the second shot at Rob. After receiving the autopsy results, Brenda and James were officially declared suspects and wanted. During their escape, James and Brenda eluded the police for many days. The authorities warned the border guards that they might have crossed into another country. However, no trace of them was found. After some time, it became clear that the two had left the country, with the police suspecting they were in Mexico. To catch them, the authorities decided to freeze their bank accounts. Without money, they would eventually be exposed. And sure enough, 3 months later, James contacted his daughter to ask for money. However, he did not expect that his daughter was cooperating with the investigation. Joanna had doubt that her father was involved in the case. It was clear he was hiding something. Thanks to James's call, the investigation discovered the perpetrator's hideout in the city of Cancun. In February 2002, James and Brenda were arrested at the border and turned over to U.S. authorities. They were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. The children were placed in the care of their grandparents. After their arrest, neither defendant cooperated with the investigation. They pleaded not guilty and spoke only when their attorneys were present. James was the first to appear in court. The prosecution built a thorough case. They presented information about James's past as an Army sniper and his ability to use a gun. His illicit relationship and the plot to murder Rob were also mentioned. His daughter's testimony and physical evidence were presented. Ultimately, the jury found James guilty and sentenced him to death. Brenda's trial was different from James's. Instead of focusing on the details of the case, the prosecutors presented information about Brenda's character and personal life. They called her former lovers to testify, portraying her as unethical and untrustworthy. When questioned about her motive for killing her husband, Brenda claimed innocence and asked to be released if people truly believed her. However, the prosecutors countered by describing her as someone who did not love her husband and killed him for personal gain. To reinforce their argument, the prosecutors presented items from Brenda's suitcase when she fled to Mexico, including lingerie and sex manuals. They questioned whether a grieving widow would act like that. During the trial, the defense team tried to portray Brenda as a victim. They mentioned that she was injured in the attack, but forensic experts determined that she had inflicted the injuries on herself. The defense also produced a confession letter from James, but a handwriting expert confirmed that Brenda had forged the document. A shocking revelation from James's attorney was that Brenda would be the beneficiary of his insurance policy if he died. This suggested that Brenda may have plotted to kill James the same way she did Rob. Or perhaps she hoped to prove her innocence and frame James so that after he was executed, she would still receive the insurance money. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Brenda guilty and sentenced her to death. Both Brenda and James are currently on death row. Brenda has appealed repeatedly but has been unsuccessful. The crimes of Brenda and James were extremely serious. It is worth noting that they claimed to be religious and taught morality to children, which makes the case even more horrifying. Those who preach morality but do not follow it themselves are hypocrites and cruel. Such people cannot be trusted because they do not truly understand and live by moral principles. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jessica Chambers. On December 6, 2014, at 20:09, emergency services responded to a report of a car on fire in a rural area. The first firefighters to arrive discovered a burning car and began extinguishing the flames immediately. The interior of the car was filled with thick black smoke that rose rapidly. As the rescuers poured foam on the car, they accidentally saw a dark figure slowly emerging from the nearby bushes. The figure looked like a young woman. The fire department approached and discovered that it was a young woman. She was severely burned, wearing only her underwear. The extent of her injuries, with burns covering her entire body. Her clothes had been burned, her skin was melting and slowly dripping, and her entire body was bleeding. Her hair had turned into a black ash, and her face was black with soot. Rescuers carefully wrapped the young woman in a blanket as she lay on the ground, waiting for paramedics to arrive. Firefighters were at her side, tending to her. Although she could barely move her lips due to the severity of her injuries, the woman still managed to speak. When asked for her attacker's name, some emergency responders heard the names Derek or Derek. She was airlifted from the small town to a hospital in Memphis. Unfortunately, the young woman's condition became critical. With approximately 93% of her body burned, she died from her injuries just 4 hours after arriving. The victim was identified as Jessica Chambers, a 19-year-old local resident. Jessica grew up in Cortland, where her mother and grandmother lived nearby. Her father and stepmother also lived in the same town but in a different location. She was a petite woman, but Jessica had a strong and determined personality. She experienced a rather complicated living environment. About her family, her father pleaded guilty to manufacturing methamphetamine and was arrested for drunk driving in the early 2000s. In 2006, her 28-year-old neighbor was shot multiple times in her yard. Growing up in such a negative environment, Jessica developed a rebellious personality. She smoked, argued with her parents, had unstable relationships with boyfriends, and had legal troubles. Jessica's behavior became more evident at the age of 17 after the death of her brother Alan in a car accident in 2012. She moved out of her mother's house a few months later because her mother did not approve of Jessica's new boyfriend. Jessica's childhood was very difficult. Her father was in prison for a while, but in 2014, he was released and worked as a mechanic at the local police department. Jessica used to deal illegal drugs and had ties to local gangs. However, Jessica is sweet and funny, and is respected and loved by most people. News of a burning car quickly spread throughout her small town. Jessica's father was quickly notified of the car fire. Upon hearing the news, he rushed to inform Jessica's mother of the tragic incident. They rushed to the hospital. Jessica's death shocked the nation, attracting widespread attention. Hundreds attended her funeral on December 13th, a memorial service to honor an active and ambitious teenager who had been a cheerleader and had big dreams. A thorough investigation into the high-profile case was launched, attracting great public interest. To assist local authorities, the FBI, ATF, and the U.S. Marshals were called in. Initial investigations suggested that the fire may have been caused by a car accident, but this theory was quickly dismissed. A closer inspection of the scene revealed no signs of emergency braking or obstructions, and an examination of the burned-out vehicle revealed no damage or signs of collision on the body. Arson therefore became the leading theory, but the police faced a challenge due to a lack of clues and evidence, slowing down the investigation. Following her death, some believed that Jessica had inadvertently put herself in danger by associating with a local gang. However, gang members have strongly denied any involvement and sent condolences to Jessica's family. The police have summoned several people for questioning, but have yet to gather any clues. The investigation has stalled. No suspects have been found, nor a motive for such a brutal act. Public pressure for the investigation to seek justice has slowed the investigation and continuously provided false clues about Jessica's life. Several theories have emerged on social media, suggesting that Brian Rudd, Jessica's ex-boyfriend from high school, may have acted out of jealousy. Another theory is that Jessica sold low-quality drugs to someone for a few $100s, potentially angering a drug dealer who sought revenge. District Attorney John Champion described the case as the most mysterious he has worked on in his 22 years in the county. He has been investigating Jessica's case since December, working with local police and multiple agencies, including the MBI, FBI, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, and the U.S. Marshals Service. During the investigation, they interviewed more than 130 people, some of whom have since been re-interviewed, including individuals named Eric and Derek. Despite these efforts, no suspects have been arrested. Police have recreated the final week of Jessica's life in detail. On December 5, 2014, her last day, Jessica received a cell phone call from a friend, urging her to drive to the M&M Mini Mart. There, she purchased $14 worth of gas and left at 5:15 p.m. About 30 minutes later, at 5:45 p.m., she contacted her mother to say she would be home soon. At that time, Jessica had her hair tied in a bun and was wearing camouflage pajama pants. After a few more stops, including one at an unidentified house and another in the nearest town, Jessica arrived at the location where her life would tragically end. It is likely that the person who would eventually take her life was in the car with her at the time. Meanwhile, surveillance footage captured a man in a striped shirt filling a gas tank and then driving off in the same direction as Jessica. Despite this clue, no further information about the man's movements after that point was available. Jessica's cell phone records revealed important information about her final moments. They indicated that she spent approximately 10 to 15 minutes near a stoplight on Highway 2, heading toward Batesville. However, there was an unexplained 62-minute gap between 6:30 p.m. and 7:32 p.m. By 7:30 p.m., her phone was at the location on Heron Road where her burning car was later discovered. Many questions remain about what Chambers was doing during this mysterious hour and what ultimately led to her tragic fate. The investigation was slow going. It wasn't until December 2015, in a separate case involving charges of illegal possession of weapons, narcotics, and counterfeit goods, that 17 suspected gang members were arrested. At the time, District Attorney John Champion did not expect any gang members to be directly involved in the arson. However, during plea negotiations, gang members were given the opportunity to cooperate with the investigation. As a result, they identified Quentin Tellis, a man who had been with victim Jessica about an hour before the fire. In February 2016, police temporarily closed the case to conduct a further investigation and determine the motive behind Jessica's disappearance. The lack of an official suspect led to a surge of unfounded speculation circulating online and throughout the town. As a result, the case attracted the attention of the police online, and a Facebook page called Justice for Jessica was created, offering a $50,000 reward for any information or clues that could lead to the arrest of the perpetrator. Rumors also circulated online that Jessica, who had previously dated African American men, had been targeted by white supremacists for her involvement in interracial relationships. However, others suggested that the perpetrator was African American because Jessica had been in a gang and that she may have tried to leave and was killed. None of these theories were ever officially confirmed. After examining Jessica's cell phone and social media activity, police were able to discover who she had been communicating with in the hours before her death. The investigation focused on Quentin Tellis, who initially claimed that their meeting had been arranged and communicated via text message and that he barely knew her, simply asking her for a ride home. However, further analysis of their messages uncovered inconsistencies in his story, leading to his arrest for the arson murder of Jessica Chambers. Text messages showed that Quentin had sent Jessica several intimate advances on the day of the tragedy. The timeline of events began when Jessica texted Quentin at 9:02 a.m. to say she had just woken up, and Quentin replied shortly afterwards that he had also woken up. Then, at 10:09 a.m., Quentin texted Jessica saying, "I'm ready." After the text, Jessica drove to the M&M gas station and was captured on surveillance footage leaving M&M a few minutes later, presumably to pick up Tellis. They then picked up a friend of Jessica's around 10:49 a.m. Jessica dropped Quentin off at around 2:03 p.m. Quentin sent Jessica another text, this time apparently asking for some affection. It was the fourth time in 4 days that he had asked for intimacy via text. Deleted texts were also recovered, including, "I'm so horny," and "Come lay with me," but Jessica did not respond. The passenger seat in Jessica's burned car was found reclined, a common position for intimate activity in a vehicle. Prosecutors used this as evidence to suggest that the two had engaged in or attempted to engage in intimate relations on the night of the incident. Quentin was charged with arson and Jessica's murder on February 24th. Building a solid case took time. Quentin Tellis' trial began in 2017 in Batesville, Mississippi, about 50 miles south of Memphis. To ensure safety, the trial had strict security measures in place, including segregating the jury and using metal detectors to screen attendees before they entered the courtroom. Prosecutor John Champion warned the jury that they would have to see horrifying images of Jessica Chambers' burned body and hear testimony from about 35 witnesses. According to police, Jessica met Quentin on Thanksgiving in November 2014. Quentin was 7 years older than Jessica at the time and had previously attended the same high school, which she had started in October 2014. Quentin had recently been released from prison, where he had served time for burglary. In court, prosecutor John Champion presented evidence of a series of text messages exchanged between Quentin and Jessica, including one on the day of her death in which Quentin asked for intimacy. And the front seat position of Jessica's burned car was found to be adjusted downward, consistent with the text messages found. Prosecutor John Champion claimed that Quentin attempted to end her life by strangling her, then, thinking she was dead, doused her with gasoline and set her on fire. A friend of Jessica's reported that the three of them spent the day before the incident driving together in Jessica's car. On the day of the incident, Quentin eventually admitted to police that he had seen Jessica that night and had gone to a fast food restaurant with her. However, Quentin claimed that he had an alibi, saying that he was with friends at the time of the fire. However, the friends he claimed to be with did not verify his alibi. Interestingly, a store surveillance camera captured Quentin a few miles away, buying a phone card for an acquaintance in Louisiana. FBI Special Agent Dustin Blunt revealed that Quinton had deleted Jessica's contact information and their text messages from his phone shortly after her death. When asked about this action, Quinton claimed that he was not trying to hide anything. He explained that he had deleted her contact number because he did not want to keep a deceased person's phone number in his phone since it would no longer be used. Notably, records show that Quinton sent private text messages to Jessica on the day of her death. FBI agent Dustin determined that Tellis and Chambers met through a mutual friend at a gas station in their hometown of Cortland. The two spent time together frequently, often driving around. Notably, Quinton lived with his mother in a trailer near the convenience store where Jessica was last seen before her murder. Notably, his DNA was found on Jessica's keys, and cell phone records confirmed his presence at the location on the night of the murder. Quinton, who maintained his innocence throughout the trial, was told by defense attorney Darla Palmer, who advised the jury to reject the cell phone location evidence, that it did not prove Quinton and Jessica were in the same place at the same time. Quinton repeatedly proclaimed his innocence to police. Even when threatened with the death penalty, he told police that he was telling the truth and was incapable of harming anyone. His family believes that police unfairly targeted Quinton due to the highly publicized racial tensions surrounding the case. To determine whether Jessica's murder was related to other recent fires in the area, police looked into possible connections to fires in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. However, no connection was found. Despite this, the investigation has yet to produce conclusive evidence about a motive. Police said they have pursued several theories but have made little progress. Typically, identifying a suspect in a homicide is a relatively quick process, as law enforcement often relies on witnesses and informants on the street for leads. In this case, despite extensive community cooperation, DNA collection, and polygraph testing, no arrests have been made. Quinton Tellis' 2017 trial ended in a retrial. By the time the retrial began in 2018, Quinton was facing new investigations in Louisiana. He was being investigated for possible involvement in the death of student Ming Chin Xia, as well as for using stolen bank cards. In May 2019, Quinton was formally charged with second-degree murder in connection with the death of Ming Chin Xia. Sherry Flowers testified at the second trial that she picked up a hitchhiker the night of the incident. However, she did not recognize Quinton in court and admitted that she did not know the man she picked up. According to Sherry, a man flagged her down, and she stopped. She agreed to give the man a ride, describing him as a thin to medium-sized African-American man in his 20s. This description did not match Quinton, who was 26 at the time and 5 feet 9 inches. When asked why she did not contact the police in the first place, Flowers explained that she could not remember the incident and did not think it was related to the case. Prosecutors claimed that giving a hitchhiker a ride gave Quinton the opportunity to return to Jessica's car and set it on fire. However, the defense disputed the timing of the trip, arguing that the driver, Sherry, was unsure of the exact time she picked up the hitchhiker, only remembering that she had picked someone up. During the investigation, Jessica's car keys were found in a ditch 2 days after her death, near the location where the hitchhiker was picked up. The defense objected to admitting the keys into evidence, arguing that it was impossible to prove where the keys had been before they were discovered. During Quinton Tellis' retrial, the jury visited the crime scene and heard additional testimony. The second trial was extremely emotional. Witnesses broke down on the stand, and spectators wept as pictures of the young woman, Jessica Chambers' burned stomach and face, were shown. Despite a second trial, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, deadlocked for the second time in 2 years on the question of Quinton Tellis' guilt in the arson of Jessica Chambers and her car. Although the suspect has been tried twice, no verdict has been reached and the case remains officially unsolved. Online police continue to search social media for any clues that may have been overlooked. Jessica Chambers' death initially attracted significant media attention. Over time, as media interest waned, the story attracted the attention of internet police around the world. One aspect of the case that remains widely discussed is what happened to Jessica between the time she left home and her death. On the night of the incident, Jessica left home at 5 p.m. and told her mother that she was going to a nearby gas station. Surveillance footage from the gas station shows Jessica visiting the station twice. The footage shows Jessica filling up, then walking toward the store and waving to someone off camera before approaching them. The identity of the person Jessica waved to on the day of her death remains the subject of much speculation. A personal tragedy becomes a public spectacle when it evokes widespread compassion and support. The Justice for Jessica Facebook memorial page, run by Jessica's half-sister, is a prime example. The page brought together people from around the world who were moved by the tragic story of a young woman burned alive. As a result, Jessica's family and friends received an outpouring of support in the form of letters, words of encouragement, and donations. People also donated gifts and books in her name. A memorial quilt was made of bright pink patches with a zebra print, along with her photo and her birth and death dates. The quilt was particularly notable because it was made by well-wishers from all over the world. One mysterious detail about the quilt was a square stitched with the phrase "secret group," a phrase whose meaning remains unknown to this day. No one has yet been held accountable for Jessica's tragic death. Quentin Tellis, a 29-year-old man already serving time for another crime, remains a suspect, but justice for Jessica has yet to be served. Sadly, Jessica's mother, Lisa, passed away on October 29, 2021, at the age of 52, without being able to see justice for her daughter. The possibility of a third trial in Jessica's case, which involved the horrific act of being burned alive, remains uncertain. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Grace Mill Lane. Grace Emmy Rose Mill Lane was born on December 2, 1996, in Wickford, Essex, to Gillian and David Mill Lane. She is the youngest of 3 siblings and is known as a loving, outgoing, fun-loving, family-oriented, creative, and artistic girl. The family is very close, so Grace keeps in touch with her siblings and parents every day, even while studying advertising and marketing at Lincoln University, where she is living away from home. In 2018, 21-year-old Grace Mill Lane graduated with a BA in advertising and marketing. Like many young people her age, Grace decided to take a year off before settling down in her career to celebrate the completion of her university degree. She chose to take a year off to travel around South America before going to New Zealand to tour. In October 2018, Grace embarked on a 10-month solo adventure. First, she traveled to Peru. Then, on November 19th, Grace arrived in New Zealand and checked into the base backpackers hostel in Auckland, preparing for a 2-week stay on the North Island. During her time in New Zealand, Grace met a 28-year-old man named Jesse Kempson, whom she had matched with on Tinder. Jesse was born on December 28, 1991, in Lower Hutt, New Zealand. He grew up in Wellington. As a child, his parents divorced, and he was raised by his grandparents for a time. As a teenager, he moved to Australia with his mother. However, in 2016, he returned to New Zealand and lived in a hostel in Wellington. Little did Grace know that Jesse had a dark side. He was known to be very charismatic, using his charm to manipulate others. Jesse struggled to keep a job or a place to live for long due to his constant lying. On one occasion, he lied to his former landlord, claiming to be a newly signed professional baseball player with the New Zealand national baseball team, the Black Sox. He pretended that his contract money would soon be transferred to pay rent. This deception lasted for 2 months until the landlord confirmed with Black Sox management that they had no idea who he was. Unfortunately, the landlord also learned that Jesse had run away without warning, costing him over $1,700. On multiple occasions, Jesse claimed to have a bachelor's degree in international law, that he came from a millionaire family wanting to buy a top restaurant in Auckland, and that he had connections in the New Zealand Immigration Department, among other lies. However, the truth is that Jesse is simply a delusional person, only able to impress others with his wild fabrications. His former roommates at Green Lane found him creepy and untrustworthy before he moved into City Life apartments. A woman he lived with claimed that he stole money from her house and then ran away. This cost the landlord at City Life thousands of dollars after Jesse lied about receiving a monthly salary and not paying rent. Jesse is a mystery to many. He often lies and frequently gets away with it. Back in the hostel where Grace was staying, she was happily conversing with Jesse. She was charmed by Jesse, even sending a text to her close friend Anna back home, telling her that she clicked with this guy. As her 22nd birthday was the next day, she decided to meet Jesse, who lived nearby, to get to know him better. On the day they were supposed to meet, Grace was preparing for her big party, feeling excited and optimistic about the evening ahead. She left the base backpackers hostel in Auckland at 6 p.m. and walked into the city center in a black dress, holding a small handbag, unaware that she was about to encounter a tragic event. The evening went off without a hitch as they went to a local bar and left together around 9:30 p.m. The next day was Grace's 22nd birthday, and her family and friends tried to contact her to congratulate her, but Grace did not respond, causing concern and panic among her family members. Grace had kept her family updated about her trip, providing them with details and photos. However, her family contacted Auckland police and reported Grace missing. Initially, detectives did not suspect Grace of any wrongdoing. They knew that Grace had not returned to her hostel on the night of December 1st and thought she might be staying with some new friends. They quickly searched for Grace on the night of her disappearance, using CCTV cameras across the city, and identified the mystery man with whom Grace had been seen that night as Jesse. That evening, Jesse met Grace. Before the appointment, he had gone to a local bar called the Bluestone Room, which was next to the City Life Hotel where he was staying. About half an hour before meeting Grace, Jesse was seen drinking 4 beers there, a lone figure in a pub further down Mill Lane. Meanwhile, Grace was waiting at the foot of the Sky Tower, where they had agreed to meet. This shows her anticipation of possibly starting a romantic relationship during the holiday. The Sky Tower is one of the most recognizable icons of New Zealand's largest city, dominating the skyline and serving as the focal point for many events. Most importantly, it is a public place where Grace would feel safer meeting someone. When Jesse arrived, the two recognized each other immediately. He hugged her as she smiled and walked toward him. The first place they visited was a burger restaurant and bar located on the first floor of the Sky City complex. During their time in Sky City, their every move was recorded by cameras. They were recorded as they went up the escalator to Andy's Burger and Bar, where they ordered cocktails and then sat together at a table to chat. About an hour and a half later, they left the bar and went to a nearby restaurant called the Mexican Cafe. After drinking 2 margaritas and a pitcher of sangria, they left the restaurant and went to the Bluestone Room, where Jesse had been drinking alone earlier. At 8:40 p.m., Jesse pulled Grace close to him and kissed her for about a second. In the next scene, they continued to kiss. Jesse then left, and Grace checked her phone, sending a final text message to her friend Anna. Grace then also left. Jesse used Grace's phone to post a message on her Facebook profile, saying she was beautiful and radiant. After around 9:30 p.m., the footage shows them leaving from the other side and going to the Mill Lane lobby of the City Life Hotel, then entering the elevator. Jesse searched for his key card as they headed toward room 308. It is unclear exactly what happened in room 308 after they arrived. However, by around 1:30 a.m., Grace had died in her room. It was confirmed that Grace never left the building, and Jesse did not call emergency services or any other assistance when she died. After Grace died, Jesse conducted several internet searches that demonstrated he was not only unconcerned about her death but was actively planning to cover it up. The next morning, after Grace had died in room 308, the man messaged another woman he had met on Tinder, trying to arrange a date for later that day. He was then caught on CCTV moving from his room to an entertainment outlet to buy a suitcase, then to a supermarket to buy some toiletries. He subsequently rented a red Toyota, and while Grace was still lying dead in the hotel room, he went out in the afternoon to meet the woman he had messaged earlier that day at a bar called The Dry in the upscale Auckland suburb of Ponsonby. The woman, who was a former reporter, appeared calm when she met Jesse at The Dry. During their conversation, he mentioned that all his friends were police officers and that a close friend was about to move to New Zealand to become a prosecutor. As they discussed a murder case she had worked on, he commented that it was a shame men could make mistakes and face long sentences. He then went on to talk about a man who had asked his girlfriend to have sex in a rough manner, which resulted in her death, making the woman feel uncomfortable. Jesse continued to lie throughout the conversation, making her increasingly uneasy. When she left the bar, although she felt very nervous, Jesse later texted her asking for another date, but she declined. After he returned to his room at around 5:45 p.m. on December 2nd, he rented a carpet cleaning device called the Rug Doctor to clean the carpet, under the pretext of removing red wine stains. After parking his rental car outside the hotel, he took a cart from the front desk, went upstairs, and returned with a cart carrying 2 large suitcases, one of which was identical to the one he had purchased earlier. He loaded the suitcases onto the cart and drove to a nearby parking lot. The silver suitcase contained Grace's body, while the second suitcase served as a cover to avoid suspicion. Throughout the day, surveillance cameras recorded him changing his clothes several times. Early the next morning, around 6:15 a.m., Jesse left the hotel and drove away, stopping only to buy a shovel at a store in the suburb. BS. During this time, Grace's parents became concerned because she did not respond to their birthday greetings. 3 days later, Grace's parents reported her missing, and a massive search was launched. On December 7, 2018, Grace's father, David Mill Lane, arrived in New Zealand and made an emotional appeal for any information regarding his daughter's disappearance. Jesse was questioned as a suspect individual after Grace's mother discovered a message he had left on her Facebook page at 9:29 p.m. on December 1st, just 11 minutes before they left the Bluestone room and went to his room. Detective Diana Levinson first questioned Jesse. He claimed that he had met Grace and parted ways with her at 10 p.m. on Saturday, which he stated was the last time he had seen her. However, detectives obtained CCTV footage from the hotel, proving that he had lied. During his second interview, he had no choice but to admit to killing Grace. However, he claimed that she had died accidentally during sex after he asking him to strangle her in an attempt to enhance their experience. Following the questioning, he was arrested, and police took Grace's body to the hospital. Grace's body was found around 4 p.m. on December 9th and buried on Scenic Drive in Waitakere Ranges Regional Park. A post-mortem examination was conducted in relation to Grace's death. It found that Grace had been strangled and had bruises on her body, indicating that she had been restrained. The murder trial took place in Auckland on November 4, 2019. Jesse attempted to explain Grace's death as an accident following a fight that went wrong, but the jury rejected his claim and found him guilty. Jesse, aged 28, was convicted of murder on November 22, 2019. During his trial, he was described as a man whose behavior was so pathological that some of the women he met or communicated with on Tinder felt very uncomfortable. It was later discovered that, before meeting Grace, he had taken another British tourist on a Tinder date and brought her to his hotel room in Auckland 8 months earlier. At the age of 21, Jesse sexually assaulted a tourist. When she refused to have sex with him, she cried and froze in fear. She kept the attack a secret until she recognized Jesse from media reports on the day he was charged with Grace's murder. A woman who had been communicating with him online became cautious about meeting him. She shared a series of messages in which he detailed his sexual preferences and admitted why he enjoyed them. It is speculated that Jesse's desire to dominate contributed to Grace's death. In a separate trial, he was convicted of assaulting his former partner. For months, he used violence, threatened her with a knife, and forced her to perform humiliating acts after telling her he had been sent by the CIA to kill her. Jesse refused to admit guilt and showed no remorse. On February 21, 2020, Jesse was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 17 years. Grace's story has raised awareness about the importance of safety for travelers, especially young women, when exploring the world. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Turpin family. David Allen Turpin was born on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, to Betty and James Turpin. He grew up in a deeply religious family. As a student at Princeton High School, David was actively involved in several extracurricular activities, including the Bible Club, chess club, science club, and a cappella chorus. After graduating from high school, he attended Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he studied electrical engineering. Notably, David demonstrated exceptional skills in computer engineering, which eventually led him to secure employment at prominent defense technology companies such as Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Louise Anna Turpin was born on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia. She was the oldest of 6 children to parents Phyllis and Wayne Robinette. Her father was a preacher and her mother worked at Walmart and singing in their church choir. However, Louise's childhood was extremely painful. Her parents often argued, which resulted in them treating their 6 children very poorly. Louise, her younger sisters, and her mother were sexually abused as children by a family member, a traumatic experience. This dark family secret was hidden for years but was later revealed by Louise's younger sisters. Despite facing their own distress, Louise was protective by shielding her younger siblings from their abuser and comforting them during their parents' intense conflicts. Her younger sister Elizabeth described her as gentle, compassionate, and caring, always working to comfort them during this difficult time. When Louise was 15 years old, she met 22-year-old David Turpin at church, and then they started dating each other. Since they feared Louise's parents might not approve, they decided to keep their relationship private. After her mother, Phyllis, found out about the relationship, she initially had concerns but eventually accepted David and Louise's bond. This was partly because David came from a Christian family and partly due to Louise's reassurances. However, they still keep this relationship a secret from Louise's father, Wayne, as they were aware that he might be very upset if he found out. 5 years after graduating from Princeton High School, 23-year-old David visited the school where Louise was a student. He managed to convince the school staff to let him take Louise out of class. Louise willingly left with David, and they set off on a journey south to get married in secret. Their plan was to elope without telling anyone. When Louise's parents found out she was missing, they contacted the authorities. However, Before the authorities can catch up with them, the couple had already reached Texas, where they intended to get married without anyone knowing. Surprisingly, David and Louise agreed to return to West Virginia without resistance. When they arrived, they thought that Wayne and Phyllis would be angry, but instead, they received a calm reaction. Initially, Wayne was angry with Phyllis for allowing their daughter to be in a relationship with David, but he eventually understood that he couldn't separate two people in love. Wayne eventually gave in and consented to their marriage. The couple got married in a simple ceremony in Pearisburg, Virginia, on February 11, 1985. 2 years later, Wayne and Phyllis got divorced, and Wayne started working as the chief deputy assessor in Mercia County. After her marriage, Louise began to drift away from her family. Free from her parents' rules, she was happy to start her own independent life. In 1988, Louise and her family welcomed their first child, a daughter. 18 months later, in 1990, they had another child. When David got a job transfer with General Dynamics, the family moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and settled in the modern neighborhood of Meadow Creek. With David's high-paying job, the Tepins enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. To show off their new wealth, Louise invited her family from West Virginia to visit. Since she grew up without much money, Louise wanted to share her new success with her family. David and Louise kindly paid for their family's travel and accommodation expenses during the visit. In 1991, the Turpin family had a son, bringing them more joy. However, the family struggled with significant debt by 1992, despite David's high income. Instead of cutting back on spending, they continue to live a lavish lifestyle and continue to have more children. In 1993, Louise got pregnant with her fourth child, a girl. Every year, Louise's family visited the Tepins, but they didn't know the Tepins were struggling financially. To keep up appearances, Louise took care of all expenses during her family's visits, hiding their financial problems. In 1994, the Turpin family's eldest daughter started first grade at Meadow Creek Elementary. Her greasy and messy hair, dirty clothes, and poor hygiene suggested that she was being neglected by her parents. As a result, her classmates teased her and made fun of her for being dirty. The following year, 1995, the Turpin family had one more son. In 1996, they took a family trip to visit Louise's relatives. At the time, the Tepins were struggling financially, but they didn't seem to worry about it and continued to spend a lot of money, taking their relatives out to expensive meals. In the summer of 1996, Elizabeth, Louise's sister, traveled with the Turpin family to their home in Fort Worth for the holidays. During the trip, the family stopped at a casino in Louisiana, where Louise and David left Elizabeth in charge of the children while they gambled. Louise asked Elizabeth to keep their activities a secret. However, Louise's gamble was in direct conflict with her Christian upbringing, which taught her that gambling was morally wrong. Unfortunately, their gamble ended in losses, which led to a fierce argument between David and Louise. David believed Louise had a gambling problem and blamed her for their financial struggles. During her stay with the Turpin family, Elizabeth witnessed the family's disturbing dynamics firsthand. David and Louise showed little affection towards their children and controlled nearly every aspect of their lives. Simple tasks like using the restroom or eating required permission from David and Louise. Moreover, Elizabeth found David's behavior especially unsettling. He regularly entered the bathroom while she was showering, watching her and making her feeling discomfort and uncomfortable. The Turpin family's problems started to worsen in 1997. In May of that year, they had another child. However, in September, concerns about her oldest daughter's health began to emerge. She was dirty and showed signs of possible sexual abuse. As a result, she was taken to the principal's office to talk about her home life. Unfortunately, no action was taken to address her situation. The family had another child in 1998, increasing their number to 6. Despite David's high-paying job, the family fell deeply into debt due to their frequent gambling. This led to significant financial difficulties. In 1999, the eldest daughter stopped attending school, followed by the other children. The parents claimed they were homeschooling, but this was not true. The bank foreclosed on the family's Fort Worth home in 1998, forcing the Tippins to move to a less populated area in Rio Vista, Texas. However, the new house was kept in a disgusting state. The owners who moved in after the Tippins reported finding dirt stains and a foul smell, suggesting the presence of feces. Before moving to the Rio Vista house, the family had their 7th child. Between 2001 and 2007, the Turpin family had 5 more children, bringing the total to 13. As time went on, the parents' neglect turned into physical abuse. They would hit, slap, choke, and whip their children for minor reasons such as using the bathroom without permission. Shockingly, the children were only allowed to bathe once a year. The children were also malnourished. David and Louise bought delicious food, but they know to let their children eat it. Instead, they made their kids watch as they left the food untouched, leaving the children to suffer from hunger. This was a heartbreaking and inhumane situation that would have a profound impact on the children's lives. The children were severely malnourished due to being fed cheap frozen meals, leading to stunted physical growth and pale complexions that made them appear younger than their actual age. Additionally, the lack of social interaction and emotional abuse significantly impacted their mental development. In 2004, the Turpin family moved to a nicer trailer, leaving behind their previous home in Rio Vista. This decision was made because their old house had become uninhabitable due to the overwhelming amount of trash and dead rodents. In 2008, Louise had a conversation with her younger sister Teresa that left her stunned. Louise, 40, revealed that she and her husband David no longer attended church, a huge change from their family's strict Christian upbringing. Instead, David and Louise became interested in Satanism and used Ouija boards. Louise also confessed that them was involved in swinging, which meant they had sex with other couples they met online. What's more, they would often leave their younger children at home with their older siblings while they met strangers online. It became clear that Louise was the primary participant in these activities, with David acting as her accomplice by providing transportation and waiting for her during the encounters. This big change in her sister, Louise, from a caring and responsible person to someone almost unrecognizable, was deeply disturbing to Teresa. Meanwhile, the Turpin family moved to Marietta and made frequent visits to Disneyland, where they took many happy photos in matching outfits. Louise sent these photos to her family, with whom she had limited contact through Skype, and kept the children isolated from them. The photos reassured Louise's family that the children seemed to be in good spirits, despite appearing underweight. David and Louise had a strong fascination with Disneyland. This is evident from that they have come here many times. And they have recorded these experiences through photographs. In 2014, the family relocated to Peru, California, about 20 miles north of Paris, previously mentioned as Marietta. By this point, the abuse and violence against the children had become to extreme levels. David and Louise restrained the children to their beds using ropes, and if they tried to escape, they would replace the ropes with chains and padlocks. The children were forced to spend around 20 hours a day locked in their room, surrounded by a foul smell that filled the air. In 2015, the family had their 13th and final child. The family took a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate David and Louise's 30th wedding anniversary. They chose to renew their vows at the Elvis Chapel, which was a stark contrast to the abuse the children suffered at home. One of their children, 17 years old, found the courage to escape through a window and call the police to report the abuse. During the 20-minute 911 call, The girl described the terrible living conditions and the many abuses she and her siblings endured. She had photographic evidence and waited for the police to arrive. When they got there, they found a malnourished girl who looked much younger than her age. The girl gave the police pictures of the inside of the house. The police discovered the dark secrets the family had kept hidden. When police officers entered the house, they were immediately hit with a strong, foul smell that made it difficult to breathe. Despite the overpowering odor, they continued their search and were shocked by what they found. 3 of the younger children were chained to their beds. The house was extremely dirty and filled with trash, and the children did not have access to basic necessities like bathrooms. The police quickly took the younger children to the Riverside University Medical Center for care, while the older children were taken to the Corona Regional Medical Center for evaluation and treatment. On January 14, 2018, the authorities arrested David and Louise Turpin, accusing them of child abuse and torture. 4 days later, the couple was formally charged with multiple crimes, including 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abusing a dependent adult, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment, with these charges applied to both David and Louise equally. Also faced a separate charge for engaging in a lewd act with a minor under the age of 14. Notably, among the Turpin children, the 2-year-old was unique in showing no apparent signs of abuse or torture. The Turpin children suffered severe physical and emotional abuse. The parents physically harmed them, including throwing them down the stairs, which resulted in nerve damage. The children lacked basic knowledge about life, further highlights the neglect they suffered. Although the parents bought toys for them, they were not allowed to play with these toys. The children's sleep was also severely restricted. They had to stay awake late into the night, often until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not permitted to go to bed before then. On January 24, 2018, the judge ordered David and Louise to have no direct contact with their children for 3 years. Any communication would have to be through their lawyers. A few months later, on June 21, 2018, the court decided there was enough evidence to put David and Louise on trial. Finally, on February 22, 2019, David and Louise changed their pleas, both pleading guilty to a total of 14 charges, including torture, abuse of dependent adults, false imprisonment, and dangerous for children. In a surprising turn of events, the court proceedings brought about an emotional reunion between the parents and their children. According to the children's statements, they had forgiven their parents and still loved them. Each child expressed concern for their parents' well-being and shared that they were doing well in their new lives. David and Louise, overcome with emotion, apologized sincerely for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success and happiness. David and Louise was given a life imprisonment sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of March 2022, Louise, who is 53 years old, and David, who is 60 years old, are both eligible for parole in 2037. The severe abuse and neglect in the Turpin household shocked the community and left many questioning why it went undetected for so long. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Diana D. Aiello. Diana Aiello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a suburb of Los Angeles. Her father had a military career, and her mother worked at a local garment factory. At the age of 19, Diana's life took a major turn when she met Kevin Green at a bar. She was at the bar with her friends when some men started bothering them. He was being aggressive, so Kevin decided to intervene. After Kevin chased the men away, Diana offered to buy him a drink as a thank you. A few days later, they started dating, and things went pretty fast from there. At the time, Kevin was married, but he and his wife were in the process of getting a divorce. Kevin and Diana decided to move in together, and Diana soon became pregnant. As soon as Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married that same day, eagerly awaiting the birth of their daughter. They rented an apartment in a small apartment complex in Tustin. Kevin worked as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby Marine Corps base, while Diana had previously worked at her mother's garment factory. However, because she was pregnant, she chose to stay home and prepare for the arrival of her daughter. By the end of September 1979, Diana was close to giving birth and could go into labor at any moment. On the evening of September 30th, after a night of watching a movie together, Diana and her husband had a disagreement. The impending birth of their child was causing them stress and they were constantly arguing. To calm down and avoid escalating the situation, Kevin decided to drive to a nearby fast food restaurant. About 40 minutes later, Kevin contacted the local police department, reporting a heartbreaking situation. His wife had been shot and needed immediate assistance by ambulance. At that time, a patrol car was nearby and the police quickly arrived at the scene. When they entered the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed in the bedroom, covered in blood, apparently from a head wound similar to a gunshot wound. The bedroom wall was also covered in blood. Diana was showing signs of life, struggling to breathe, so the police began first aid while they waited for the ambulance. They also asked Kevin to leave the room because they were still unsure of what had happened. When paramedics arrived, they carefully loaded Diana into the ambulance for further medical attention. Initially, the paramedics suspected that Diana had been shot, but it was later determined that her injuries were actually blunt force trauma. Kevin wanted to go with his wife, but the police would not allow it. They needed him to give a statement, and at that time, they were investigating every possible scenario, including the possibility that Kevin was involved in the attack. Kevin, in shock, did not understand what the police were saying, even tried to get into the ambulance that was leaving, forcing the police to intervene and stop him. Kevin regained his composure and then explained the events of that night to the police. He had an argument with his wife and decided to leave the apartment to calm down. He drove to a fast food restaurant to buy some burgers. As he left the apartment, he realized he had left his keys inside but decided not to go back to get them. Instead, he closed the door and walked to his car. While driving, he noticed a truck nearby with the back door open. Kevin reported seeing an African-American man parking the truck near their apartment complex. At around 2 a.m., Kevin decided to stop by his favorite fast food joint, but the line was too crowded, which discouraged him. So he chose another location of the same chain nearby. About 40 minutes later, after buying some burgers, he arrived home to find the front door wide open. This was unusual. Kevin rushed inside and heard strange noises. When he entered the bedroom, he was shocked to see Diana lying in a pool of blood and struggling to breathe. Kevin immediately called the police for help. Kevin's story was somewhat confusing and raised many questions. Going out for a burger in the middle of the night seemed unusual. It took him about 40 minutes to make the trip, which was quite long considering all the restaurants were close to his home. The police checked the fast food bag and found the food was still warm. The receipt contained the restaurant's address and time of purchase, which matched Kevin's account. After verifying this, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but first, they requested a blood sample to compare with traces of blood found at the crime scene. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors examined her head wound and determined that it was not caused by a gunshot. Instead, it appeared that her attacker had used a small, heavy object, such as a piece of wood, to hit her multiple times. Diana soon fell into a coma at the hospital, prompting doctors to work urgently to save both her and her unborn child. After several tense hours, they were able to stabilize Diana, but she still needed surgery. During this time, the police asked medical professionals to evaluate whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. The examination was part of standard investigative procedures, and the position in which Diana was found prompted the police to consider the possibility. Experts confirmed that there were traces of semen on her body. However, Kevin told the police that he had had sex with Diana just hours before the argument, and that DNA analysis results were not yet available at that time. Therefore, even with a biological sample from the perpetrator, there was not much that could be done. Kevin and Diana's family waited anxiously at the hospital overnight, hoping that Diana and her baby would pull through. However, in a tragic turn of events, the baby's condition suddenly worsened the next morning. Despite the doctor's best efforts, they were unable to save the baby. Diana underwent emergency surgery shortly after the baby's death and her condition stabilized. Although she remained in a coma, chances of survival were relatively high. And the medical team hope that she can recover and return to normal life after such a serious injury. Meanwhile, the police are trying to identify the person who attacked Diana. After the baby's death, the case was reclassified as a homicide, causing the local police department to allocate all available resources to solve the case. Although Kevin provided an alibi, the police were not quick to rule him out as a suspect. His story raised many questions. He had argued with his wife just hours before the attack, left the front door unlocked, and was absent for an extended period of time during a trip to the fast food restaurant. However, there was no evidence against Kevin. His claim of seeing a suspicious man near his home in the middle of the night led the police to another suspect. About a year before this case, crimes with a similar modus operandi began occurring in and around Tustin. In December 1978, a 17-year-old girl was the victim of a fatal break-in and assault. The perpetrator broke into her apartment, beat her with a wooden object, and sexually assaulted her. 4 months later, a similar case occurred. A 21-year-old woman was killed in her own home after being beaten with a piece of wood by an intruder. In July 1979, an unknown perpetrator broke into another woman's apartment and did the same to her, her injuries leaving her in a coma for several weeks. She eventually recovered. However, her testimony did not provide any new leads for the police to catch the perpetrator. In September 1979, less than a month before Diana's attack, a similar series of events occurred to a 31-year-old woman who died the following day. All of the cases had striking similarities, leading the police to suspect that they were dealing with a serial killer, similar to the one who attacked Diana. The police focused all their efforts on capturing this individual, who had earned the nickname the Bedroom Destroyer. Due to the short time between the cases and the fact that the perpetrator was operating in a relatively small suburb of Los Angeles, the police believed that he might strike again soon. The police decided to issue a public warning through the media, warning all women living alone, especially those living in ground-floor apartments, as they appeared to be the serial killer's primary targets. The announcement caused widespread panic, prompting many women to purchase self-defense products, sign up for self-defense classes, and temporarily move in with friends or family for safety. The police interviewed anyone who might have had any connection to the crimes, and they soon received their first leads. Several of the victims' neighbors reported seeing a suspicious white man with thick black hair near their home. Although the description was vague, the police found several men who matched and investigated them, but got nowhere. 7 days after Diana was attacked, doctors updated her family on her condition. She had regained consciousness, but unfortunately, her recovery was fraught with complications. Diana was unable to speak or recall her memories because her brain functioned at the level of a normal 6-year-old. Her brain needed time to recover. During this time, a similar incident occurred in Tustin. A 24-year-old woman was brutally attacked in her apartment by an unknown assailant, who beat her with a wooden object and sexually assaulted her. Sadly, the woman's injuries were fatal. Despite their efforts, the police were unable to arrest the perpetrator. Diana spent several more days in the hospital, and her mind gradually returned to normal. Despite this progress, she still struggled with severe memory loss and could not remember her parents. Doctors informed her family that her memory might recover over time, but they advised against reminding her of anything and instead letting her remember on her own once her health stabilized. When Diana was well enough, she was discharged and her family took her home. Because Kevin had to continue working on the military base to support the family financially, they decided to move in with Diana's parents, who could care for her around the clock. 6 weeks after the attack, Diana was still attending physical therapy sessions and her condition was gradually improving. She still couldn't speak or remember what had happened to her, but that all changed suddenly 6 weeks after the attack. When her therapist brought up the attack and asked if Diana remembered anything about her attacker, Diana responded in surprise, nodding and pointing to her wedding ring, a sudden revelation that took her doctor by surprise. When Diana's mother came to pick her up, the doctor told her about this, and the mother asked her daughter, "Was it Kevin who attacked you?" Diana nodded. Right after that, her mother took her to the police station, where she spoke with the lead detective. He asked Diana a few more questions, and she confirmed that she suddenly remembered the moment of the attack and that the perpetrator was none other than her husband. For the detective, this completely changed the course of the case. He and his team were almost certain that Diana was attacked by the same serial criminal responsible for the other similar attacks. But now the detective faced several questions. Could Kevin be the bedroom basher? He lived in the same area where the attacks happened and even matched the description provided by several witnesses who saw a white man with dark hair. Or did Kevin decide to get rid of his wife by disguising himself as the active killer? Considering that all the actions of the bedroom basher were almost identical each single time, it wouldn't have been difficult. The detective thought that if he arrested Kevin now, his involvement in other crimes might never be proven, and Kevin himself could flee as soon as he realized he was caught. So he made a difficult decision. He asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana still remembered nothing and to return home to Kevin. This was obviously a huge challenge for both of them, but they agreed nonetheless. Investigators put Kevin under surveillance and closely monitored all his movements, hoping to eventually link him to other attacks. Police spoke with Kevin's friends to learn more about the suspect. And they quickly found out something interesting. Those who knew him well said that his relationship with Diana was quite tense. The couple argued frequently, a fact also confirmed by neighbors who often heard their screams. According to friends, Kevin regularly complained to them that Diana refused to be intimate with him in the final months of her pregnancy. Yet Kevin had described his relationship with Diana to detectives as nearly perfect. But besides that, detectives couldn't gather any additional useful information. Kevin behaved quite normally. He went to work and came back home without lingering anywhere else and didn't raise any suspicions. The police also received results from the lab revealing an interesting discovery. Besides the attacker's semen, they found skin particles with blood under Diana's nails. Specialists matched the blood type of the attacker to Kevin's blood sample, and it matched. It meant that Kevin had the same blood type as the person who attacked Diana. Based on this information, detectives came up with the most likely version of what had happened on that fateful night. Kevin indeed bought burgers at a fast food joint a few miles from home. The time on the receipt and cashier's words confirmed his presence. So, the detectives believed he could have attacked Diana before leaving home, then quickly went to the fast food restaurant to create an alibi explaining the extended 40-minute trip. Regarding motive, detectives theorized that Diana's refusal to engage in intimacy served as the trigger. Despite Kevin's claim that they had had sex hours before the incident, he frequently complained to friends about Diana's reluctance for months. Given the severity of the attack, detectives believed this was Kevin's breaking point. The police re-interviewed Diana, who confirmed she vividly remembered the attack and that Kevin was indeed the one who assaulted her. During the conversation, her mother said they could no longer pretend and live under the same roof as Kevin. the police decided to arrest Kevin without arresting him at Diana's home to avoid endangering her family. Instead, they arrested him at a store. Despite his arrest, Kevin maintained his innocence, claiming that everything happened exactly as he told them. As the trial proceeded, preparations took nearly 10 months to complete. During this time, Diana's health gradually improved, allowing her to regain her ability to speak, albeit with some difficulty. Diana was examined by multiple doctors, all of whom agreed that her brain had recovered and that she was now a credible witness. In court, Diana positively identified her husband as her attacker that night. However, Kevin's defense team argued that he was innocent, claiming that he was at a fast food restaurant at the time of the incident. Unfortunately for Kevin, Diana's testimony was stronger than his alibi, resulting in a guilty verdict. As a result, in November 1980, Kevin was convicted of murdering his child and assaulting Diana. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In the wake of Kevin's possible involvement in the serial killings, the police noticed something interesting. Before Kevin was arrested, there had been 2 more similar cases in their county. But both victims survived. They had not yet been able to identify the attacker, so his identity remained unknown. But after Kevin was arrested, the attack suddenly stopped. Before that, the bedroom wrecker had committed crimes quite frequently, sometimes only a few weeks apart. However, after Kevin was arrested, there were no more similar cases. After the verdict, Diana filed for divorce, and Kevin did not object. Diana then focused on recovering her health, but her progress was slow due to the severity of her injuries. She lost some of her hearing and vision, and she was having difficulty speaking. Meanwhile, Kevin never gave up on his claim of innocence, even after many years had passed. However, life in prison was extremely difficult for him. Fellow inmates often targeted him because he was convicted of murdering a child, which led to him being hospitalized several times. Kevin applied for parole but was denied by the board. He continued to receive 3 more denials in the following years. The main reason for these decisions was Kevin's refusal to plead guilty, which was seen as a lack of remorse. When DNA analysis became a standard tool in forensic science, Kevin requested that his DNA be compared to existing samples. However, his request was denied because he could not afford the analysis. In 1996, the police department reopened the investigation into a series of attacks believed to have been committed by the bedroom basher. During this time, semen samples taken from the victims' bodies were stored in a laboratory. Now, the police had a chance to identify the perpetrator behind all of these crimes. Kevin was still considered the prime suspect, but DNA analysis revealed something surprising. When experts compared the DNA profile, the semen samples matched the DNA of another man, a man named Gerald Parker. Gerald was arrested the same year as Kevin. His crime involved the attack on a 13-year-old girl in Tustin, and he was arrested shortly thereafter. Initially, the police did not link this case to the other series of attacks because of the different attack methods. The bedroom basher typically targeted his victims at night while they were in their apartments, while Parker attacked the girl on the street. He has since served his sentence in prison and is expected to be released in a few days. After police got a DNA match for Gerald in the unsolved cases, they re-examined the Diana attack. Although the crime was considered solved, police still considered Diana's case to be connected to the serial killer cases. They now understood that Kevin was definitely not a serial killer, leaving them with only one question: did he really attack his wife? Gerald was stationed at the same military base as Kevin and owned a dark-colored truck during that time. Notably, on the day of the incident, Kevin reported to police that he saw an African-American man near a dark-colored truck outside their home. This statement led police to consider the possibility that Parker may have been involved in the attack on Diana. The local prosecutor visited Kevin in prison and updated him on the progress of the bedroom basher murder investigation. During the visit, the prosecutor asked Kevin to provide a direct DNA sample for analysis. Kevin, who had been trying to do this for years, immediately agreed. While the experts were analyzing Kevin's DNA, the police went to see Gerald in prison. At that time, they had not yet charged him with the series of attacks, because they needed time to prepare such a complex case. However, the police decided to talk to Gerald, hoping that he might confess. Gerald initially denied any involvement in the series of crimes. To get more information, the police changed the subject and asked him about the attack on Diana. Before proceeding with the interrogation, they reviewed his file and discovered an important detail. After being arrested for attacking the girl, he told the police that military service was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The police took advantage of this information, questioning how he could have let another soldier take responsibility for his crimes. They continued to pressure him by appealing to his loyalty to the army. This strategy eventually yielded a breakthrough when Gerald surprisingly revealed that another man was actually serving time for the murder he had committed. Gerald admitted that he had driven to Kevin's house in his truck that night. His intention was to explore the neighborhood in his truck, looking into ground floor windows for potential victims, as he had done many times before. However, when he arrived, he heard screaming coming from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and when a man walked out, Gerald noticed that the man had left the door unlocked when he left. After waiting for a few minutes, Gerald entered the apartment and attacked Diana. He said he had not known Diana's husband before, as they had been on different assignments at the military base. Gerald confessed to several crimes, including 6 murders and 3 non-fatal assaults, in addition to the crimes for which Kevin had been wrongly convicted. DNA testing confirmed Gerald's guilt and Kevin's innocence, supporting Gerald's confession. The prosecutor promised to overturn his conviction as soon as possible, and a few days later, Kevin was released after 16 years in prison. The development caused public outrage, not only because an innocent man had been wrongly imprisoned for nearly half his life, but also because it took the police so long to identify the real culprit. After Kevin was released, the state of California paid him $10,000 in restitution. A few years later, he received an additional $100 per day payment for his time in prison, totaling $620,000. But the story doesn't end there. Even though Kevin was completely exonerated, Diana still refused to believe in his innocence. Up until that point, she had claimed that Kevin was the only one who attacked her. However, after biological material from her body matched Gerald's DNA, she came up with a different story. Diana said she was attacked and assaulted by Kevin, who then left, followed by Gerald. However, Gerald claimed that when he entered the apartment, Diana was lying on the bed without any injuries or signs of distress, and he admitted to hitting her on the head. Diana's family offered another explanation. Kevin may have colluded with Gerald to commit the crime, which would explain why Kevin left the house with the door open. Gerald, on the other hand, repeatedly denied knowing Kevin, pointing out that the military base was home to many people who did not know each other. Kevin also insisted that he had nothing to do with Gerald and vowed that he would never harm Diana or their unborn child. He insisted that his only mistake was leaving the door open because he did not want to go back to get the keys immediately after an argument with his wife, a decision that still haunts him. Diana maintained her version of events, and one reason may have been the severe trauma she suffered during the attack. The trauma had a profound impact on her brain. When Diana awoke from her coma, doctors advised her family not to inform her of what had happened, as her brain was extremely sensitive to new information at that time. She would treat any details provided as real and accurate memories. It is worth noting that even at the time of Kevin's release, 16 years after the incident, she continued to experience severe post-traumatic stress. This suggests that the effects of the trauma had affected her brain beyond repair. It is also possible that the trauma was the main reason she convicted Kevin of involvement. Gerald Parker was sentenced to death in 1999, but the death penalty has not yet been carried out. Instead, due to California's moratorium on the death penalty, Gerald remains in prison to serve his sentence. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Caitlin Root. Sometimes, criminals who look for victims just for fun or out of a desire to kill. In the state of Missouri, USA, there is a town called St. Joseph. This is a small town with many parks, museums, and other attractions, as well as a large number of running tracks and walking paths in one of the parks called Krug. On Sunday, October 16, 2016, a man went out jogging. Closer to the end of the trail, the man noticed something suspicious on the path. Initially, he thought it was a mannequin because Halloween is coming soon. So, he calmly continued to run past it. When he reached the object, however, he noticed blood on it. At first, he simply ran past, but something alerted him and made him turn back. The mannequin suspiciously resembled the body of a girl. There was a hole in her chest. She was lying on the asphalt without clothes, in a pool of blood. The frightened witness called 911 for help. Even when he contacted the dispatcher, he was not sure whether it was a mannequin or not. This story unfolded in mid-October, 2 weeks before Halloween, when one could encounter various oddities. Perhaps it was a Halloween prank or some kind of decoration for the holiday. When the police arrived at the scene to investigate, they confirmed the witness's worst fears. It was indeed the body of a girl. The criminal did not even bother to hide the traces of his crime. Just a meter away, clothes were found, which had been neatly cut off. Additionally, the girl's false nails were scattered around the body, indicating that she had desperately resisted and that her nails had been damaged in the struggle. During their examination, forensic scientists were unable to find any identification documents for the girl. She had no personal belongings, means of communication, or the weapon used in the crime. To make initial conclusions, it was crucial to determine who the victim of this brutal massacre was. The only clue that could help the police was a T-shirt she wore. It had an inscription indicating that she was a student at Central High School, graduating in 2017. It was assumed she was a high school student preparing to receive her diploma the following year. The fingerprints of the victim were collected, but no matches were found in the national database. This was not surprising, given the approximate age of the victim. It was unlikely she had a criminal record. The authorities were forced to close the park to visitors for the next 24 hours to continue inspecting the area. A larger-scale operation was launched, involving many more law enforcement officers, and results came quickly. They were able to find broken parts of a mobile phone, which had been disassembled and scattered around the area. Over the next few days, the communication device was collected and completely restored. Meanwhile, the forensic expert performed an autopsy on the body, revealing that the girl had been brutally tortured before her death. Her throat had been cut twice, but that was not the cause of her death. She had received several stab wounds from an object similar to a knife, one of which had pierced her liver and caused fatal bleeding. Without emergency assistance, a cut throat could also have killed her. There were signs of prolonged strangulation on her face, which complicated the determination of exactly what had occurred. According to the forensic expert, the strangulation may have involved something like a long piece of fabric. Simultaneously, several officers visited the school indicated on the girl's T-shirt to identify any missing high school girls. At the school, the police talked to the principal and teachers, showed them photographs of the unidentified victim. The girl was recognized. Her name was Caitlin Root. She had studied there for some time before switching to homeschool. Caitlin was born on November 11, 1998, into a large family with 5 sisters and 5 brothers. She was very positive, artistic, and funny, and loved singing, dancing, walking in the fresh air. Her last hobby was hunting for Pokémon in the park, which was very popular at the time. It was unclear what attracted her to Krug Park, located in another area of the city that was less known to her. It was beautiful and quiet, a favorite place for many runners until this tragedy occurred. However, There were some remote and gloomy spots where locals rarely ventured. That is where Caitlin's body was discovered. At school, Caitlin's close friends were devastated by her loss, and they willingly cooperated with the investigation. When the Root family was informed that the body of their missing daughter had been found, everyone was heartbroken. They desperately wanted to find who had so cruelly taken the life of a girl just 3 weeks shy of her 18th birthday. Despite her close relationship with the family, at the time of the incident, Caitlin did not live with them. She had grown up and wanted more independence, freedom, so she was temporarily staying with her best friend, who lived with her grandmother. The whole group had to maintain constant contact, but nothing suspicious was noticed. The police visited this house to speak with all its residents. In fact, the family with whom Caitlin was living at the time noticed her disappearance and contacted the police. Upon identification, the police talked to Caitlin's friend's family and finally received the first valuable clue. According to Caitlin's friend's mother, a few days before the crime, Caitlin had an online argument with her boyfriend. She was planning to break up with him, but the situation escalated into a big fight. The woman reported that their last meeting ended in a confrontation, after which Caitlin was left with a bruise. This mark was also found during the autopsy. All this gave the police their first suspect, whom they decided to interview. They were not able to find him right away, but several of Caitlin's boyfriend's friends responded. None of them believed that Caitlin's boyfriend could physically harm Caitlin, as he was not prone to aggression or violence. No one had noticed anything like that about him before. However, the police wanted to speak with him in person. Witnesses were also found who reported seeing his car, which allegedly stopped near Krug Park late in the evening. All this strengthened the suspicion against him. Finally, the police met with Caitlin's boyfriend. The evidence of his involvement began to mount, as there were numerous marks on his body and arms, minor wounds resembling scratches. He attributed these to branches while riding a motorcycle. He stated that he met with Caitlin, and the last time they saw each other was on Thursday, a few days before the murder. On that day, a friend of his also joined them. Everything seemed fine, and according to him, Caitlin spent a lot of time with them, with no conflicts occurring. Therefore, he found it very unpleasant to receive a call 2 days after this meeting from an unknown person who accused him of beating women. This voice sounded threatening and offered to meet to confront him about what he had done to Caitlin. The caller then hung up. Caitlin's boyfriend didn't understand that there was a deeper implication behind this. Despite there being no conflicts between them, he was surprised when Caitlin later accused him of breaking her nose. After that, she hung up and ignored his calls. He considered any accusations of aggression and cruelty, especially towards his girlfriend, to be absurd. Afterward, Caitlin's boyfriend published several posts on his social media, suggesting that Caitlin had convinced her friends to turn against him. He couldn't understand the reasons behind it but felt he didn't have time to figure out the details. Notably, he provided an alibi for almost the entire Saturday and Sunday, having visited several friends, all of which were confirmed, leaving no time window sufficient for an attack. Despite the suspicion, nothing significant could be obtained against him, except for the name of another potential suspect. Caitlin's boyfriend told the detectives about Adam, who, according to Caitlin, had been literally obsessed with her. He behaved anxiously to such an extent that he began to stalk her, sending letters with ambiguous content and insinuating that he might take his own life if she didn't want to meet him. Before the crime, the police learned that Adam communicated with his best friend on social media on October 15th at around 8 p.m., which was the last time he contacted her. To the surprise of the police, this best friend turned out to be Caitlin. Adam had added her to his list of close friends, probably to avoid drawing attention to his unhealthy attraction to her. Before meeting with this new suspect, the detectives decided to gather more information about him and interviewed his closest acquaintances. They discovered that both Caitlin and Adam attended a party on the night of the murder and were supposed to spend time together. At the gathering, Adam was accompanied by a couple of friends, and there were witnesses who saw the whole group leave late in the evening, with Caitlin among them. Several attendees were confident that they all planned to go to Krug Park, where Caitlin's body was later found. It is noteworthy that they returned without Caitlin and told everyone that she had left with an unknown group of people, which seemed strange, uncharacteristic of her. Upon checking Adam's social media profiles, it turned out that the day after the murder, he began posting peculiar messages. While he did not specifically mention what he had done, he clearly expressed regret for some action. However, when interrogated, he insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime and that the post referred to something entirely different. Instead, he recounted his version of events. According to Adam, when they left the party, Caitlin received a message from a friend named Amanda. After exchanging several short messages, they agreed to meet at Krug Park. Adam stated that he had warned Caitlin that it was a bad idea to meet anyone at such a late hour, especially in a park he barely knew, but she didn't heed his advice and left. Adam claimed that he was just friends with Caitlin, had no conflicts with her, countering the allegations of stalking and obsession, which he also considered absurd. He showed the detectives the correspondence, where they found nothing incriminating. By Adam's own admission, the allegations of obsession with Caitlin were clearly fabricated. He explained that the last time he saw her was not far from the place where they had spent time with friends, and she got into an SUV, which she was probably picked up in by Amanda. Adam himself saw this car for the first time, did not know who it belonged to, he couldn't recognize it, nor could the other participants at the meeting. He insisted that he believed Amanda was involved in what happened to Caitlin. Interestingly, his account was immediately confirmed by several witnesses among the young people who were at that meeting. They also saw how Caitlin got into an unknown Santa Fe SUV while Adam stayed with them. Adam appeared extremely upset and even went to the family of the deceased to express his condolences. Everyone believed that he sincerely mourned this loss and willingly helped the Root family cope with their grief, even assisting Caitlin's family during the funeral. Further investigation confirmed that she had indeed communicated with a girl named Amanda. When detectives spoke to the father of Caitlin, David Stevens, it turned out that David was well acquainted with all of his daughter's close friends. There weren't many of them, and Amanda was among them. According to him, their relationship was complicated. The teenagers were sometimes best friends and at other times fought and literally hated each other. It emerged that this girl was known to both Caitlin's best friend and her mother, both of whom considered Amanda a very unpleasant character who left mixed impressions. Consequently, the police became interested in Amanda and decided to meet with her. She was detained and ended up under interrogation. Amanda did not immediately disclose all the information they knew about the case. She even reported that Caitlin had disappeared rather than died. From the very beginning, Amanda acted as if she did not understand what was happening. According to her, she did not call Caitlin on that fateful evening, had not seen her. Amanda countering what Adam and his friends claimed. Their last conversation, she said, took place on Saturday afternoon. She even provided the police with her social media account so that investigators could verify her statements. She used the pseudonym Amanda Panda without any photos. Amanda continued to deny that she had communicated with or met her friend on Sunday and provided an alibi, stating that her neighbor could confirm she had spent the entire evening at home. The police checked this information, and the woman confirmed the alibi, reporting that she had repeatedly seen Amanda in the house throughout the evening, including at the approximate time of the attack. They had crossed paths and communicated several times, which ruled out her involvement in the crime. Amanda had no plans to go out anywhere and had been at home all evening in her loungewear. After this confirmation, the police were forced to let Amanda go. All possible leads were investigated, but they remained empty-handed. The investigation reached a dead end. Due to the many participants involved, the story became so confusing that it spiraled out of control. Then, the police accessed Caitlin's mobile phone in search of clues, allowing detectives to navigate the gallery and find a photo that was the last one taken before the brutal attack. There were no people in the image, but it included the facade of a store found in the city, about 5 kilometers from Caitlin's house. After obtaining access to the recordings from the store's CCTV cameras, they managed to find a car that matched the description of the SUV associated with the team. When this photo was taken near the store, a dark car pulled up, from which a limping man emerged. He bought snacks and immediately left. Unfortunately, this did not yield any clues, as the store employees did not remember anyone, and the image was too blurry. The police continued to study the mobile phone of Caitlin regarding the account named Amanda Dow. Correspondence from this page revealed that she had communicated with Caitlin on the evening of her murder. Between them, there was a short dialogue where the girls agreed to meet and smoke a joint. As it turned out, this account belonged to a girl named Amanda Bennett, the same Amanda who was now under scrutiny by the authorities and likely had several accounts on social media. She was a 17-year-old girl who, at the time, was in a serious relationship with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Sebastian Dowell. The police went to the address where Amanda and Sebastian lived. They immediately found a dark Santa Fe SUV that matched the description of the one captured on CCTV at the convenience store where Caitlin had filmed just before her death. There were enough clues to consider Amanda and Sebastian prime suspects. They were arrested, and while they provided an alibi, it took some time to verify it. It was decided to arrest them and also confiscate their vehicles, mobile phones for examination. Detectives questioned them separately. When they spoke to Amanda, they didn't disclose what they knew. They simply decided to restore the chronology of events starting from Friday, which was a clever move. In fact, the police were particularly interested in Saturday and Sunday. If Amanda remembered Friday well but suddenly could not recall anything from Sunday, it would appear suspicious. The police often use this technique during interrogations to break down criminals. Amanda detailed her Friday evening spent with her boyfriend and their 2-month-old child. Difficulties arose, however, when she was asked about Saturday. Suddenly, she claimed that she had actually confused the days, and the events she described occurred on Saturday. Meanwhile, Sebastian also struggled. He could not recall what he had been doing with his common-law wife in the past few days. His statements increasingly contradicted the story he had provided. Everything suggested that Amanda had prepared for her meeting with the police, but she became a little confused. Her boyfriend didn't have much time either. He couldn't even say anything about the movie they supposedly watched together at the cinema, despite Amanda describing it in detail. But they was never found on the CCTV footage. There were no tickets or any data confirming that they had been in the area over that weekend. Amanda's story remained uncorroborated. This suspicious couple was clearly lying to the police. When Sebastian was confronted with the obvious inconsistencies in their stories, he became nervous. After that, the police noticed there were some cuts on his hands. Sebastian said they were from a cat, however, he later changed his story and admitted that they might be from his knives. His collection contained numerous stabbing and cutting items. During the arrest and searches, several knives from Sebastian's collection were confiscated in hopes of finding blood on them. Later, the examination confirmed that there were particles of Caitlin's blood on one knife. During the conversation, it became evident that Sebastian was in a subordinate position in the relationship, which he confirmed by stating that Amanda controlled everything happening 100% and that he obeyed her. According to him, Amanda completely excluded strangers from their social circle. He didn't even have friends that he could choose on his own. In fact, his social interactions were restricted because Sebastian complained that he had to ask for permission for any of his desires. For example, he liked to smoke a joint, but he would only do so after getting Amanda's approval. She was jealous and rude. In fits of anger, she often beat Sebastian quite cruelly. Once, she even broke his ribs. Sebastian feared that Amanda would eventually kill him with a knife. Sebastian said that Amanda suffered from some mental disorders that would suddenly thrust her into this aggressive state shortly before the crime. They had gone to a psychotherapist, but all the doctor did was double the dosage of her medications. However, Sebastian was not entirely innocent either. His social media profile contained a lot of dark humor, as well as cruel and murderous imagery. It seemed he was obsessed with this topic. Despite the detectives not revealing the real reason for Amanda and Sebastian's arrest, it turned out that Sebastian was aware of the murder in the park. He insisted that he had heard about it on social media, but he had already been caught in a lie. The more nervous he became, the more his story changed. In the end, he admitted that he knew Caitlin quite well. They communicated frequently. He and Caitlin were good friends. Caitlin even visited them in the hospital to congratulate them on the birth of their child, during which she spoke warmly about him, touching Amanda, the new mother. From that moment on, indirect evidence began to surface, suggesting that the tragedy was provoked by Amanda's jealousy and erratic behavior. At first, Sebastian denied such assumptions, but later he confessed that Amanda had often expressed anger towards him when he exchanged compliments with Caitlin. He continued to deny any romantic connection between them, insisting that it was purely friendly communication, while also maintaining that he was not involved in any crime. One of their friends mentioned that Amanda had always been friendly, sociable, and positive. However, the situation changed dramatically after the birth of their child, which many attributed to postpartum depression. In addition, she believed that something more than just friendship had developed between Sebastian and Caitlin. Amanda frequently referred to Caitlin and was clearly angry, exhibiting intense jealousy towards her boyfriend. Judging by her friend's words, this turned into an obsession with getting rid of Caitlin. Moreover, Amanda was aware of many details about the crime that she could not have known by chance, as they had not been covered in the media. This discussion smoothly led to topics about their relationships and the birth of the child. Amanda's demeanor visibly changed when they began discussing Caitlin and Sebastian. This was clearly a sensitive subject for her, but she composed herself and did not reveal her emotions. It is curious that during the entire interrogation, Amanda did not show any regret or pity toward her friend. On the contrary, from the very beginning, she appeared in high spirits and giggled frequently. Considering the circumstances that had led Amanda to this situation, her behavior seemed unsettling. The true motive behind this case included records of demonic summonings. This confirmed that he was involved in all sorts of dark themes with his girlfriend, but he claimed that it was all part of a hobby and role, playing games, insisting that they did not take it too far or commit any crimes. However, there was confirmation that they planned the murder in stages. Even though the information was deleted, it was easily recoverable. This became the main incriminating evidence against both criminals. When both were informed about this evidence, they abruptly changed their tactics, refuting their earlier statements and beginning to blame each other. Judging by their correspondence and records found in the house, both criminals were charged with first-degree murder. Upon reviewing their dialogues, the frightening truth of this brutal massacre was revealed. The murder was indeed ritualistic. That evening, Amanda and Sebastian sent a message to 6 contacts from their list to lure one of the victims into a trap. They probably did not care who responded, but only Caitlin Root did, which ultimately sealed her fate. The jury was shocked by the senselessness of this act of violence, simultaneously remained confident that it was Amanda who initiated it and took the life of Caitlin with pleasure. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and Sebastian likely helped by holding Caitlin. On May 5, 2017, Sebastian Dowell was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder in the death of Caitlin Root. Just days later, on May 9, 2017, Amanda Bennett was sentenced to life in prison for the same crime, second-degree murder. Both are without the possibility of parole. Caitlin's family, while satisfied with the sentence, expressed deep sorrow over the loss of their daughter.